Hi everyone, welcome back to Solar Storage Fest. We're here with day two. I'm Erin Autin, our Senior Director of Research and Content here at Zpryme, and thanks for being back with us today. We had a lot of great content yesterday, and we've got another good lineup for you here today. Chris, could you go ahead and spot Jason for me? There you are. Hi, Jason. So I'm here now with our CEO, Jason Rodriguez. Jason, I think I definitely learned a lot yesterday, and one of my biggest takeaways was the importance, but also complexity of partnerships. Collaboration is definitely key. But we heard from one speaker about a really great project in the works that's sort of been difficult to move forward just because of the number of stakeholders involved. So really learning how to navigate those complex relationships is really important. So what about you? What are one or two of your biggest takeaways from yesterday?
Yeah, hey everyone. Thank you, Erin. Yeah, there was so much to absorb, and it was a great kickoff. And looking forward to today. But I think three quick ones was just the resilience and equity piece, where it really stood out in this new context, and they're very much interlinked in how we achieve kind of this next phase of the energy transition. We heard that from the kickoff, and then it was also weaved into several of the conversations, the solar equity panel, and then talking about some of the unique financing mechanisms, which would be the second key takeaway, is that there's very much new solutions coming and expanding on the financing side. The panel you moderated, Erin, I learned so much on that panel. It's just really interesting to see how much interest has been bubbling up there. And you're right, like the need to expand stakeholders and bring new people to that conversation is very much key to getting that piece. And then the last one is just innovative platforms for research and development and investment also need to be accelerated. We heard that with the panel with Debbie from INREL, moderated by Dylan on our side. But you also kind of saw that you also need that to accelerate innovation, not just the R&D part there. So those are my three key takeaways, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing some of the key insights from today.
Yeah, it was actually pretty exciting on the panel. You mentioned that I moderated yesterday. We had some breaking news in the middle of the panel that the House version of the National Climate Bank bill has been included in the Democrats' budget that was just announced yesterday, and it does have some bipartisan support. So there's definitely a push for climate infrastructure that, like you said, will be intertwined with the resilience and equity piece there. Okay, so just a few notes before we get started. Remember everyone online to, interact with your fellow attendees. Let us know where you're from and share your LinkedIn profiles so y'all can connect with each other. And don't forget to ask questions of the panelists using the chat. Even if we can't get to them in the discussion, our panelists are usually pretty good about responding to you guys. So keep the questions coming. And don't forget about our social media challenge. If you post a picture of a sunset using hashtag SSF and tag Zpryme, we'll pick a winner at the end of the event. And the prize is a $100 gift card plus an annual pass to all Zpryme 2022 events. So pretty good prize for you there. And then finally, keep an eye out for some trivia questions coming at you throughout the day. And we're just going to get started with one quick one right now, I believe. All right, there we go. So, in what state is America's largest solar farm? And if y'all just want to participate in that poll, which one do you think? Give people a few minutes to get their answers in.
Nevada's in the lead.
All right. I think everyone's got their answer in. Go ahead and close it, but let's see. The correct answer is actually, sorry, Ricky, can you share the correct answer in the chat for me? Let's see.
California.
California. All right, so some people got it right there, but so keep an eye out for those trivia questions coming throughout the day. And with that, we will kick things off. We're gonna hear from CPS Energy's Director of Technology and Product Innovation, Rick Luna, and Rick is going to be talking about some of CPS's community-centric solar programs. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming Rick to the stage.
All right, well, good morning. Just want to make sure you guys can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you. All good.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here this morning. As Erin said, I'll be talking about CPS Energy's customer-centric solar programs. And, want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the marketplace and, some emerging needs. So, how we've tried to address those and maybe, what the future holds. So I'll try to get through this and give you time for questions if you have any at the end of the presentation. So again, Rick Luna, I'm the Director of Technology and Product Innovation, and I've got responsibility for our energy efficiency, conservation, and renewable programs on the customer side of the business. And so we've been active in this space for a long time. Just a little bit about CPS Energy to get started. So we are the largest municipally owned electric and gas utility in the country. We're the largest solar power producer in Texas and 5th in the country. And we're the 2nd largest wind power producer in Texas. So, all indicators of our commitment to renewables, again, been of longstanding duration. So we're not new to this space, and we have about 1 million customers across our electric and gas utilities, and 3,000 employees that work every day to serve our customers. This is a slide that we like to share every time we present. It just lays out really the guiding pillars, the foundation of who we are and what we do. And as you can see there, reliability, customer affordability, security, safety, environmental responsibility, resiliency, all of these are core to who we are and what we do. And they're balanced by financial responsibility, right? We never lose sight of the fact that as a community-owned utility, we have to have a commitment to being well-managed and being financial responsible, being that these programs ultimately are benefiting and costing our customers dollars. And so we want to make sure we make the best decisions for our community's future. Moving on to some of the innovation and how we're thinking about the future. We've been on this path now. We call it the flexible path for a couple of years. Really looking at how do we move from an era of central station power plants to a world of renewables, lots of renewables, storage, emerging technologies, smart grid, and of course energy efficiency, which is the piece that my team manages. And how do we continue to drive that innovation as technology emerges, new opportunities are created, new needs on the part of our customers are created, and how do we continue to respond to that and stay relevant to the things that are important to our customers? And so we'll talk about how we're doing that in the solar space in the next few slides. Let me just say a little bit about our utility scale renewables. Again, we've been doing this for a long time. have a major commitment to solar and wind all across the state and locally, and it just gives you that visual to where those commitments and investments are. They represent over 1,600 megawatts of renewables, in addition to rooftop solar, and that's what we're going to talk about today, and some of our community solar programs that we offer. And so drilling down a bit, to what we're doing in the energy efficiency space. Back in 2009, we created the Safer Tomorrow Energy Plan. We call it STEP, with a commitment to really invest in a big way in encouraging and incentivizing customers to reduce their demand of energy. And we've done that by building out a portfolio of programs that really drive value, benefits to our customers, and reward them for reducing energy usage. In some cases, nudge them with information to make smarter choices about when to reduce and so forth. And this is kind of the whole portfolio. And so you see here some of our partners. We do this through leveraging partnerships with technology providers. We can't do it all ourselves. We learned that lesson early on. And so we partner up, right? We identify the best partners out there to help us deliver these programs. So we do a lot of energy efficiency, both residential and commercial. We have a large demand response program that's really critical for us, about 250 megawatts of curtailable load that's available to us, both residential and commercial customers during the summer months. And then solar, which is what we'll be talking about more today. We've got a solar rebate program that's very popular. And then we've come up with some new options to serve customers through roofless solar and through our solar host SA program. So again, drilling down a bit more, this is getting into the specifics of our solar programs. And the idea here really is to provide customer choices, right? And while solar rebates, as you'll see there at the left, is still by far the most popular program, over 24,000 customers have installed solar on their home or business. It's been a very popular program for many years, and it continues to grow. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. But that doesn't always meet the needs of every customer. And so we've tried to innovate around other programs that create new choices, new opportunities for customers. And that's our solar host there in the middle, and then community solar. Certainly you can see the scale is different. These are smaller programs, but what we've seen is that there are these needs that we have to continue to identify and try to serve. And so we envision, potentially doing many more of these over the next several years. Again, as we identify needs, trying to develop a program that can serve that need. So talking about solar rebates, as I mentioned, very popular program. And what we're doing here is we're offering customers, an incentive on the upfront cost to help bring down that initial cost. And this applies to whether it's rooftop or ground-mounted systems, again, residential or commercial. And you can see the incentive levels there. I will tell you, these have declined over time as the cost of solar has come down. We have likewise been bringing the incentives down to stay in line and be able to spread those dollars across more customers. So when you combine the rebates, plus, of course, most customers are able to take advantage of a federal tax credit, it becomes a much more doable proposition for customers. And, we hear of payback, anywhere between 10 and 15 years, depending on the upfront cost of the system. And for most, for a lot of customers, that's doable, right? And so they've made that investment. And in total, our rebates have amounted to about 147 million to date, and that continues to grow. We spend about 15 million a year on solar rebates, so it's a sizable commitment from our STEP program. I mentioned solar is popular. This is a graph that we track closely the amount of applications that we receive. What's been interesting is that well, a couple things. We had a record month in June, so we had 679 applications, most we've ever had, and you can see the history there. So certainly we've seen very, very strong interest. We've got a very healthy marketplace. If you look at the time series there was a time right after COVID began, March of 2020, where it did slow down, but not for long. By July, it started picking up, and we've seen it. There's some seasonality there, but for the most part, it has stayed strong throughout. And July is setting up to be another big month. So we think that's great. Of course, the one challenge is with more solar out there, more solar companies pitching their products, there is this need for customer education, and really this is an ongoing challenge, right? A lot of times, folks make the decision to go solar because they're approached by a sales company or solar company, and they don't always have the time to invest in research and education before they make that decision. So, we try to get out there. We do lots of community events. We have this site that we co-sponsor with the Build San Antonio Green to really spread the message about doing your homework, getting multiple bids, really weighing whether or not this is the right investment for you, and if so, how big should that system be? And so we try to get in front of that. And we're always available. Customers can call us, and we will walk them through the process and try to really get them to make a better decision, because the last thing we want to see is a customer who makes a major financial commitment. We're talking $10,000 to $20,000 to $30,000, and then they end up regretting that, or they call us and they wish they had done more research. And so it's continuing trying to stay ahead of that and continue to put more resources out there to inform customers. One way we do that is we maintain a list of registered solar contractors. The most common question we get is, where do I get started? And so we have a list. These are companies that have registered with us. They meet qualifications. They've got licensing in place, and they've got a designer who's certified to design a solar system. And then there are disclosures that are required to make to customers. If the project's going to come through our rebate program, for example, they've got to clearly spell out the cost of the system to the customer, and the customer has to sign off that they understand that cost before they get in. Now that said, we do occasionally get complaints about companies, and so we take those complaints. We try to make a resolution for the customer to get them to a better place. And again, unfortunately, sometimes the customer hasn't done all the research, and so that can be a more difficult conversation. But we're here as a resource to try to help them, right, and resolve issues. And we work with solar contractors. I would tell you, the vast majority of companies on this list are committed to solar and the future of solar. And so they want good outcomes for customers, just like we do. And so I think of it as a partnership, working together to help customers, get a product that they're in and an end result and experience that they're happy with. So I'll switch track here a little bit, talk about community solar. I mentioned that earlier. We started down this path in 2016. We had heard from a lot of customers who wanted to go solar, but there were barriers to that. And maybe they lived in an apartment, or maybe they owned a home that was in a historical area, or frankly, maybe they were older and they felt like they didn't want to make a huge commitment. And so if there was a way where they could transfer the ownership, to someone else, as a legacy, then that was something they were looking for. And of course, doing research, lots of examples across the country. We jumped in 2016 with our first 1 megawatt roofless solar program. Was very successful. We were able to sell out that project pretty quickly. And then 2019, we launched a second round we called the Big Sun Community Solar, working with a local partner on a 5 megawatt project. And I'll get a little bit more into that. I think it was a really creative approach that really, I think, has been a nice model for a new way to do community solar. I will say both programs are now fully subscribed, so we're happy to say that. Of course, we are selling the panels to customers. I should say that. This is not a subscription model. This is where the customer owns the panel. And so it takes a little longer to sell, of course, because you, again, have to do education and really get them comfortable with the decision and the fact that CPS, is going to buy the energy and has a long-term commitment to this project. So just at a very simple level, the way it works, and I'll talk specifically to the Big Sun project here, is we build carports, working again with our local partner, build carports across the city and commercial spaces where the parking underneath the structure could be leveraged as a revenue stream. And so the commercial tenants that are leasing the spaces to us basically are paying for the benefit of the covered parking, which also helps pay down the cost of the solar. So I think that was a really creative approach. So the customer owns the panels. All of the energy that is produced comes back. This is in front of the meter, so it all comes back to the grid. And we CPS have a commitment, a PPA, to buy all of the energy for the life of the deal. I believe it's 25 years. And so the customer gets their return through a credit on their bill every month. And so it feels just like owning it on your house. It is your system, and you see the financial benefit on your bill every month. So I think the intent was to maintain that sort of continuity of experience. And so this is just some photos of that. So you can see on the left, the first iteration of the project, we did build a solar farm, the 1 megawatt solar farm. It's located about 15 minutes from downtown. We initially built this with a partner, but actually CPS now owns this project. So we bought the project about a year ago. And so we're maintaining that. We have a team of CPS employees that, this is one more asset that they maintain. And then on the right, you see the Big Sun Community Solar. This was one of the projects that was built out. And again, these are all over the city, multiple sites, and the project was sold to 469 individual panel owners. And they can buy anything from 1 panel up to 100% of their usage, whatever that number that is. So again, both programs fully subscribed. And I did want to touch on one thing. Of course, affordability is critical. We understand the challenge of going solar for some customers who maybe don't have upfront investment capital. And again, working with our local partners, the Big Sun, the folks at Big Sun, they developed a really innovative pilot program to help address the equity gap. And so what, of course, on the left, the barriers, right? Access to credit, the lack of the down payment, home ownership and structural challenges. And what this pilot program, offered up was working with a local credit union to provide financing for customers. There was also a partnership with a local nonprofit to provide financial mentoring, financial assistance. And really, the intent was to get that upfront cost down, and then put the customer in a position to where they would be basically cash flow positive on this deal from the very beginning. And we were able to do this with the help of some grant assistance, and 45 families were able to become owners of panels in the program, in the Big Sun program. So it was a small pilot, but I think that's the kind of things that are needed to really begin to tackle and address solutions to this type of challenge around access to credit. And so with that, I will stop there, and certainly looks like we have a few minutes. Welcome opportunity to answer any questions. I guess for the Zpryme folks, should I just go to the chat, or all right? Look like Jason, you're coming on.
Yeah. Hey, Rick. Yeah, I was seeing some of the chat here from James on the community solar replace the old roofless solar. What are those differences? Looking in the chat, the question from it's James Orenstein.
Okay. Yeah, looking at that now. with regard to lessons learned, certainly happy to meet offline and share with you some of the lessons. I can't do it all justice in 5 minutes, but happy to have a separate conversation. Regarding the status, yes, these are pilot programs. They were pilot programs. And when I say we've sold them out, right, they were built to a specific size. And so we had a certain number of panels available, and those have now all been sold. That said, by design, community solar does sometimes have people who leave, right? You have to be a CPS customer to get the benefit of the credits. And so if you leave our service territory, you may change those over, either transfer them or sell them to someone else. And so we do have a waiting list. If customers are interested, they can get on that waiting list. And if panels come available, they usually do. Then we can facilitate a transfer. So hopefully that answers your question there.
Yeah, I had a question on. I saw like there was, I think there's 40-something families in that one program, and that was assisted by grants. So was there a pretty rigorous application process for folks to opt in there, and to apply to have get involved in that program for the customers that are on there?
No, by design, I wouldn't use the word rigorous. I mean, I think by design, right? The idea is to lower the barriers and make it an easier process. And so again, happy to talk about that offline, and we'll bring in the folks at Big Sun. I think they can do a great job of explaining how they tried to really streamline that process so that you don't have to do a bunch of paperwork and then it's it's a challenge, right? And it kind of maybe drives folks away. I think there's a lot of good lessons that we picked up from that experience.
Okay. Are you starting to see, like, as the pandemic has started, we're starting to come out of it, you guys starting to see a lot more activity, maybe from some of the solar partners or the community out to ask more questions there, Rick, in general?
Yeah, I mean, going back to that graph that we talked about, for the last 12 months, we have seen sustained, growth and interest in solar, and we've seen more companies come into the market, right? So definitely the word's out, I think partly, a lot of folks have been at home, right? And they've had a chance to think about, home improvement projects. And maybe some folks have cash, from not being able to go out and spend as much. So a lot of different factors, but yeah, definitely we have seen that interest is really strong.
Okay, we do have Robert Miggins on from the partnership there. Chris Holt on our team. You give Robert a chance to be able to speak, and Robert, I want to see if you want to chime in. Just off the cuff.
Perfect.
Hi, Rick. Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can.
Okay. Hi, Rick. Hi, Jason. Sure. Listen, this is Rick's presentation, but and so I'll just briefly try to fill in about the most recent question around the solar assistance program. The question, I think, was sort of maybe lessons learned, or how hard was it to sign up? To Rick's point, we tried to keep it as easy as possible. So the other thing we did was we wanted to structure the eligibility of who qualifies in a way that's very similar, or in fact, it's exactly the way one would qualify for other assistance programs at CPS Energy. So if you qualify for Casa Verde weatherization on your home, income-wise, then you would qualify also for our solar assistance program. That part was kind of easy because CPS has already done the great work, and we just had to sort of clone their eligibility criteria. The part that was really tough was finding a bank, and in our case, a credit union that was willing to make loans to folks that have either no established credit or difficult credit scores. And so as a company, we are guaranteeing those families loans, and so that kind of strengthened the credit of the borrower. That was something we had to figure out. And also the other tough thing was how to round up and recruit the the nonprofits that are contributing money on behalf of these income qualifying families in order to give them a down payment assistance grant. So that, basically hustling up sort of donations was some effort. And also, it was interesting. We finally found a great bank, a credit union. It took a while because a lot of other banks they just didn't know what kind of a box to put this program in. They think of assets that are typically on top of a roof, and we're like, nope, community solar is not on the roof. So you're not going to have to go repo any solar panels that someone has, defaulted on. We just keep them plugged in, and we continue to sell the power back to CPS Energy. So it took some iteration to sort of finally get a bank that could connect the dots, because it's unusual. Community solar is still a little bit different. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we have time for one more question. And the question you saw in the chat about maybe the business model and how that shapes out. Rick, I'm not sure if you or Robert Kabasi provide some clarity there. He's asking about the subscription fee and how that is broken up. And I know you touched on it a little bit, Rick, on the presentation as well.
Oh, sorry there. Yeah, just 1 second. Again, what we've done here is not a subscription model. I know that's really popular in other parts of the country. We wanted to try to replicate sort of the ownership model, right? Just like if you were to build it on your house. And so we wanted, these panels to be, basically sold to the end customer. And so that's the way we've structured it. So the customer pays up front, they own the panel. They can also claim the tax credits and all of that up front. And then their return comes from their bill credits every month. Those panels will produce, and it's going to be seasonal, just like if you own it, at home. And so based on the actual output and your share of that production, we'll pay you a bill credit, and then you get your return, of course, over a number of years. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, I think I don't know, Robert. I think once customers kind of understood the sort of the financial model, I think it was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's right, Rick. Yeah, and we spent a lot of time explaining those economics to our prospects. So we wanted them to understand, here is how it works. We manage the asset. It's your asset. It belongs to you. It's part of your estate, if you will. If you're an older person, you're thinking about your estate. This is part of your property. We're just the custodian of it for you. And we make sure it's performing for you. And then the bill credits come through your bill at CPS Energy. So we did have to invest quite a bit of time helping people understand not just how it works, the solar technology. These are first-time buyers, but also really dwelling on the financials to make sure we were very, very thorough about that. But it's not once you understand, it's just like it's in many ways not exactly like having it on your roof, but very, very similar. I think that's part of it is just the education process.
Got it. Well, gentlemen, thank you, Robert, for jumping on. Rick, excellent presentation. And those in the chat, we will make the presentation available. Thank you guys so much, Rick, Robert, great work. And
absolutely. Thank you again, everyone. Have a great day.
So next up, folks, we have a great discussion on storage at capacity. It's going to be led by Dylan Lockwood from Zpryme. Dylan, I believe you're on, and I will hand this over to you.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome, everyone, to day 2 of Solar Storage Fest. I am Dylan Lockwood, Senior Editor at Zpryme. Today, we're here to talk about long-duration storage solutions and capacity markets. We're trying to define market incentives and system constraints as well. And I've got 2 great fellows here to discuss that with us today. I'll let them introduce themselves. Cyrus, I'll pass it off to you first.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here. This is Cyrus Etemadi, VP of Development at Fractal. I lead most due diligence, advisory, contracting support, and market overview insight on behalf of our clients. So at Fractal, we are a consulting firm specialized in energy storage. across different sizes, use cases, applications in different markets as well. And we also have a platforms solution for EMS and controls of battery storage systems.
Thank you. And Donny.
Hi, how's it going? I'm Donny Holaschutz, and I co-founded inodu, and I'm a consultant in inodu. And at inodu, we do work across power markets in Latin America and the US. We have looked significantly at different business cases for short duration storage and long duration storage, and even further than storage, thinking about storing energy through power fuels and the use in the grid for even longer duration applications.
Thank you both. Happy to have you on board. And just before I jump in, I would like to remind everyone that just if you feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll get to those when we can. So, but let's start at the base level, which is providing a sort of a definition for long duration storage, because what long and short duration means has sort of changed over time. So what does that mean today versus how we used to define it?
Donny, would you like to take this one?
Sure. I mean, I could start with that. I mean, I think there's not a, there's not a formal definition of long duration storage, essentially. So basically, a way to look at it, or the way I look at it, is that the types of functions that it could provide to the grid, essentially. And when we're looking at storage, there's three different sort of durations, right? There's like the really short-term duration, which is really focused on like the real short time deviations, frequency control, ancillary services. And then we have functions where we need capacity in order to have long-term reliability for the grid, or be able to handle events where we need to have enough generation or storage, essentially to handle events where the grid is essentially does not have enough generation capacity, or the demand goes up. So that's sort of how I see long duration storage, is taking on that functionality, providing that reliability and adequacy to the grid in the long term, essentially. And when we look at that, long duration, I mean, it varies, right? You're going to need storage that is going to provide different types of functions, or solve different types of shortfalls for the grid. So in the traditional world, the grid used to face like certain long-term reliability shortfalls, and they had to do with demand periods, actually demand going up, or being sure that you had enough capacity in order to take on unexpected growth in demand during a certain period of time, essentially. So that was traditionally what you would plan the grid to be able to do, essentially the capacity installed, that you would plan for that, essentially. And then also you would be concerned about unit outages. But now that you've integrated renewable energy, essentially, there's other new types of shortfalls. You have to make sure that in the long term, you could satisfy the changes in the net load, essentially. So that's the demand minus renewables, essentially. So you have to have enough ramping capacity in the grid in order to take that ramp. And if you don't, you're going to have unserved energy. You're going to have problems with reliability in the grid. The other thing that you have to be concerned about is having renewable energy drought, right? I mean, essentially, what if you have several days where essentially the wind is not blowing as much as you would expect it? How are you going to deal with those types of situations? So long duration takes care of those challenges, or those longer term shortfalls, but there's not like an hour specific definition essentially for it, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that, Donny. The only thing I would add is, long duration storage is nothing new, right? Traditionally in the US, we have over 23, 24 gigawatts of pumped hydro power allowing for that peaking capacity, energy time shifting, and being able to also provide ancillary services, and their duration anywhere between 8 to 12 hours. So that long duration resource is already here and operating and really providing that reliability capability to the grid. For grid scale battery storage, it started, as you mentioned, from a short duration, operating reserve or frequency regulation, less than 1 hour duration. The next phase or trend that we see, and a lot of activity on the development side, is really tailored to that peaking capacity with the advent of renewables penetration in the production mix. So anywhere between 2 to 6 hour duration batteries are currently being implemented to provide that peaking capacity and meeting that load in the evening hours when the sun is not necessarily providing as much energy or PV production. And then the next big milestone is going to be that long intraday, multi-day to seasonal capability and energy time shifting over 12 hours. That's going to be the missing piece, frankly, on finding the right technology and resource, which we will talk to in just a moment.
Yeah, let's jump into that, Cyrus. So what are some of the options for long duration storage from a technology perspective?
Right. So existing proven technology, again, pumped hydro is proven. It's been working for decades. Now it does require a significant amount of land, geographically constrained, multi-year construction periods. So alternative technologies have started, such as compressed air, flow batteries, hydrogen resources, green hydrogen production and storage. These are not necessarily the most price competitive today. So when we think about marginal cost of duration from a costing standpoint, they are significantly expensive when you go below 2 hours. But when you add incremental duration or number of hours of storage to lithium ion or to hydrogen flow batteries, then those economies of scale really benefit those resources. So without incentives or significant amount of policy tailwinds and regulatory efforts, those technologies are not currently economically viable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Cyrus. I mean, there's a lot of changes happening in the long duration. Traditionally, we had seen that pump storage was the solution of choice, right, over a long period of time. But I mean, I do see some areas where there's some quite interesting trends in terms of technology that we're seeing. So for example, liquid air energy storage, we're seeing that just the costs associated with that and that are being offered in the market are becoming quite competitive, essentially. And we've been involved in evaluations of those types of assets, and they have the potential to become more competitive over time. Obviously, these types of technologies rely on more proven components, essentially. So the cost reduction potential with production capacity is not going to be as significant as something like lithium ion. Another area is like, lithium ion itself is becoming much cheaper. And so initially, we were just looking at it for shorter duration applications, but I think it's becoming, and it's going to become more competitive over time for longer duration applications. And then I see some pretty interesting innovation just sort of in the nexus between, for example, water and energy. For example, we've been involved in Chile in a couple projects which they were pioneering these types of projects, which were using seawater or ocean water for pump storage, essentially. And just because of the specific geography that's available there to leverage that. And that was, something very different and new to try to be able to implement those types of projects. But what I've seen is other companies emerge that are basically using that same, that differential in pumping differential to also desalinate water, essentially. So in places like Chile and California, where, you might have locations where you have that differential and you're also experiencing drought. And you can use that energy to not only, store energy for the grid, but you can also use it to desalinate as well and provide water for people. I see a lot of value in that. And in terms of hydrogen, I think in power fuels, things are just changing quite rapidly, essentially. We've done a lot of analysis on the production cost of hydrogens on a kilogram perspective, essentially, and on an energy content perspective. And what we see is in places like Chile, where Chile should be one of the producers in the world that is going to have the lowest production cost of hydrogen, just because of the capacity factor seen for solar and wind resources in the country, and the cost of the LCOE of solar and wind technologies in the region. We're seeing that, for example, by 2025, green hydrogen from an energy content perspective is going to be cheaper than diesel, essentially, and that's a big deal. And over time, that's going to change quite rapidly, and so there's going to be the opportunity to use those hydrogen itself or convert it to other power fuels like methanol or ammonia, in order to be able to store that energy and use it for generation and displace diesel in the future, and sort of be that long-term fuel that you could use for these longer-term droughts. But then you're also going to have all this storage innovation, which is making longer duration storage cheaper. And so there's going to be a competition that is going to play out that's going to be quite interesting to see in the future.
Yeah, and there are a few. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, there's that was very funny. I tip my cap to the prankster. But anyway, there are other energy storage solutions that I think are just fun to geek out about. I don't know about I'm not positive about the long-term viability, but I've read stuff about like thermal storage with like molten salt buried in the ground. I think that's really cool. I read something that they're trying in Europe to develop something about with synthetic natural gas as kind of a storage alternative. And so I definitely think there's a lot more research and development to be done in developing these solutions.
Yep. No, I agree. And I think that thermal storage solution is actually quite interesting. We've gotten to work on, and they're becoming quite competitive. There's technology providers. And then, with, for example, the retirement of coal facilities or existing, generation infrastructure, essentially, people are looking to see how they reuse those facilities and install, for example, thermal storage and be able to use the existing infrastructure. And another technology I forgot to mention is also that's changing quite rapidly is flow batteries as well, which is also, aimed at long duration. So there's a lot happening, and I think this is where, this is where a lot of the activity is going to be in terms of innovation. And it's really what the system is going to need in the future to integrate more renewable energy. These costs are going to have to come down. We need different technologies and options, and it's going to become more and more important, because you cannot continue to integrate large amounts of solar, especially without having this capacity to support and to displace the energy from the day to night, or displace the energy between days.
So, we talked about the technology, and we also want to, hit the main focus, which is capacity markets. So let's start with how capacity markets let's start with how they can sort of benefit from this kind of long-term storage. What makes them uniquely suited for for these kinds of solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are hundreds of gigawatts of dedicated peaking capacity serving different ISOs in different markets in the US, and a big portion of them are expected to retire over the coming few years, if not over the next decade. So some of these retirements are driven by policy. such as air quality, cooling water regulations, etc. But some of them are really due to age of these plants. So the potential of replacing these peaking capacity resources with battery storage or another type of energy storage technology has really created a big amount of opportunity for deployment across different ISOs, different nodes where those peaking capacities were initially, and they can expect big volatility or variability in prices. That's really what's driving today's development activity as a front-of-the-meter standalone resource. But as more ISOs and markets are saturated with battery storage, those peaks that would initially be mitigated with their use case are going to be probably wider, and therefore longer duration storage will then be more necessary in order to mitigate those wider peaks and those shoulder peaks.
So how are standards shifting, and how does that translate into opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, going into a little bit of the standards and how these capacity markets are evolving, essentially. I mean, there's a need, essentially, as you integrate more renewable energy into the grid, to maintain the reliability of the grid and make sure that you can take on all that variability from the renewables, but you can also take on the traditional variability, which comes from the demand and some of the system constraints that comes from like outages, transmission constraints, and all that kind of stuff. So essentially, capacity markets in general, the standard was, looking at sort of the periods of maximum demand for the grid, right? And seeing, okay, am I prepared, given, a certain amount of outages, am I prepared to take on those periods of maximum demand? Or am I prepared to take on periods where, I'm going to have a significant amount of outages in the system? Can I do that? And so now, and that's how like capacity markets essentially were designed, right? But now that renewables are being integrated, there's like a lot of questions being essentially asked into, okay, we don't only have to think about the potential of unserved energy if, we have certain units go out, or, we have the demand go up this way, but what if, we have, this type of profile of generation profile? Can we actually take on the net load ramp? So the capacity markets, in essence, are trying to figure out, and a lot of regulators are trying to figure out how to do planning and how to incorporate these needs that are going to emerge in the future into the capacity markets and the way that they pay for capacity in the future. And I think there's a lot going on in terms of analyzing this and understanding that. And so I think one thing going into the future is there's going to be a lot of learning from the different markets in terms of standards, adapted.
Yeah, and building on that, what are some of the constraints that are unique to capacity markets that might present challenges for long duration storage?
Right. I don't know, Cyrus, you want me to take that? Or yeah, I can.
I can start maybe with the biggest constraint being duration requirements for different capacity markets. Some ISOs are more favorable for battery storage deployment, such as in New England, where they're looking at 2-hour duration in order to get fully compensated for their capacity or their firm capacity. And most ISOs are fluctuating between that 4 to 6 hour duration requirement. And then we have PJM, which is at their 10-hour rule. Significantly derating, the likes of battery storage in terms of compensation for capacity. The biggest trend that we've seen is this transition towards an ELCC methodology, or the effective load carrying capability. And as a result, as penetration of renewables and battery storage increases, a shorter duration system will more likely be less valuable to the grid as a capacity resource and receive less capacity revenue. So we should see an incentive structure or construct for longer and longer duration systems as a result. But policy, as we know, takes time to evolve through stakeholder processes, but we feel that this trend is going to continue on over the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, just in many different ways, I agree with Cyrus. You know, there's still a lot to be understood, and in terms of how to plan for the long term. And you use the effective load carrying capability. I mean, just so, I mean, I don't know if people are familiar with you know, what the effective load carrying capability is essentially, but it's, you know, essentially you're calculating for renewables and batteries. You're doing a calculation how much reliability they're going to be able to provide to the grid in the future. I mean, that's like the simplest way to describe it. And it's like a very sophisticated model essentially that you build, and you run a lot of scenarios and all that kind of stuff to see what the potential different renewable energy generation scenarios could be, the different demand scenarios, different outage scenarios. And you say, look, you know, this asset is going to be able to contribute with this amount of reliability during these periods of time. And basically you essentially calculate a percentage of how much you would recognize that type of asset, right? And based on that percentage, that's how you get paid in the capacity markets, essentially. You know, there's different ways of doing things, but in the end, you say, okay, you know, solar contributes 20%. And so that's like the recognition that they get in the capacity market, and that's how they get paid for it, essentially. And so, but there's a lot of thinking to do there, because essentially, you know, one of the things with storage is that its contribution to reliability really will depend in the capacity markets into how much storage is installed in the system, right? The more storage is installed in the system, the less value it creates, right? Also, you know, it will depend on other sources of generation. So if in a market, you know, you start retiring a lot of gas units and coal units, then, you know, the value of storage is going to go up in that market because you don't have other capacity that could supply that reliability whenever the sun is not shining or the demand is going up or there's an outage, essentially. And it also depends not only, what's interesting, it also depends not only on the existing, you know, thermal capacity, but it also depends on the type of renewable energy capacity that's installed in the grid. So if a grid, in general terms, if a grid, you know, starts integrating more solar, there's more need for storage. And the reason it's, I mean, just logically thinking about it is, you know, you integrate more storage, you are generating the day, but you don't have anything during the night. So essentially, who's going to supply the night? Who's going to supply that reliability in the night, right? And so if you have a system that has, you know, a region that has very good solar resource and integrates a lot of resource, then the capacity value of storage with more solar integration is higher than when wind in general, right? Depends on the wind profile, but wind blows, you know, many times in many regions constantly during the day, essentially. And so what you care more is about the uncertainty around wind. So there's a lot of different types of things happening. And like, I think a very important point that Dylan mentioned, or Cyrus mentioned, essentially, is that longer duration storage essentially really is made for you know, providing reliability, right? Because and getting paid through the capacity markets, right? Because, you know, if you think about a business case, right, one business case for storage is to shift energy from the day to the night, essentially. But there's only going to be, you know, certain hours of the day where there's a big enough differential or a very nice differential. And over time, that differential, you know, the price of differential where you can charge low and sell high starts getting lower and lower and lower, you know, as more hours go on in the day, essentially, right? And so that longer, if you have a longer duration energy storage solution that has a duration of 12 hours, it's really not expected to be shifting a lot of energy. Yeah, it's going to be shifting for a couple hours of the day, right, when prices are low and high. But then the rest of the time, it's just essentially sitting there to provide reliability to the grid. And so that needs to be recognized in the capacity markets. And that's going to happen, right, as more renewables get integrated, and more of these challenges are observed in the longer term modeling and planification.
So we had a question come in. Admittedly, it's not about capacity markets, but it's about Texas, and both of you, I believe, are in Austin. So I think this you can speak to this. And James asks if there's any comments on how we plan for adding storage to the ERCOT wholesale competitive market, and if rule changes at the high levels are going to be needed for that to occur. If either of you can speak to that.
Yeah, I can take the first pass on this, Donny.
Okay.
So what we've seen is really a conceptual difference in how ERCOT approaches, adding new resources to the grid, and being an energy market with a pretty robust ancillary service. That speaks volumes to developers and IPPs who are looking into adding battery storage to their portfolios. And as a result, we see tremendous amount of development activity, and that's also reflected in the interconnection queue. So the RRS market, or the rapid response reserve, is inherently acting kind of like that capacity market, entering into that auction and then idling, waiting for a signal to discharge. The energy price signal is also another big key component to it. The advent of wind and solar penetration in ERCOT has also enabled a lot of nodal variability, which has once again encouraged a lot of development activity. So as opposed to like a New York ISO or CAISO, where a lot more regulation, a lot more oversight is played into resource adequacy or the capacity market, ERCOT is just letting supply meet the demand in essence.
Yeah, I mean, complementing what Cyrus said, I mean, in the future, adequacy is going to be very important. That there's no doubt. We've looked at planning in different regions essentially, and really and trying to understand how the system's going to look in the future in markets in the Northeast, in California, in Latin America. And essentially the biggest driver for energy storage in when we look at those markets primarily is adequacy. Right? You need to add capacity because if you don't add it, you're going to have unserved energy somehow. You're going to have very strong reliability challenges, especially thinking about all the integration of renewables that you're going to have to be doing, the retirement of facilities because they're getting older, or because you have renewable portfolio standards, or you have a price on CO2. You start applying that, and you really have to start thinking about how are you going to pay for that reliability. One way to pay for reliability or adequacy is through the capacity markets. And I mean, ERCOT has had a different philosophy in terms of that. They in the future, they might have to adjust that philosophy. I mean, but we'll see, right? I mean, obviously that's something that's evolving. But what we do know is that, thinking about adequacy is going to become more and more important. But the only mechanism to basically incentivize adequacy is not only the capacity markets. It's also PPAs as well. So PPAs are a great mechanism to essentially think about or incentivize installation of energy storage, because PPAs, in a sense, when a client signs a PPA, it's a contract that can go 10, 15 years. Some PPAs are much shorter duration, but if somebody's going to build capacity to supply that PPA, the PPA is going to be over 10 years. And essentially, how we innovate in those contracts to make sure that there's enough capacity available in that supply to lower the future risks that are emerging because of the integration of energy are going to be important. But that innovation is going to happen for the most part between private parties, because private parties sign PPAs, right? But there's sometimes also public auctions, and there's going to be an opportunity there to innovate on the terms and conditions of those PPAs and how to think about, you know, the adequacy and the firmness of the energy that's being supplied to the end client. The other interesting area, I think, and that's what we're seeing in ERCOT, that's quite interesting, exciting, is that, you know, we saw what happened with ERCOT, right? in recently with this snowstorm, and there was challenges there. There was enough capacity in the system that was operational to supply the changing conditions of the system, the raises in demand, essentially, and, you know, the outages of different types of units because of the weather conditions. And so that was an adequacy challenge, right? And so the market in ERCOT is reacting in an interesting way. I see a lot of activity on capacity being installed behind the meter, for example. So clients, and that's going to be another place, right? You can, instead of, you know, relying on the system to have the capacity for you, then you might be an HEB and install your own capacity behind the meter to make sure that, you know, whenever those reliability challenges occur, you can supply the demand.
So I'm glad you brought up adequacy there. Cyrus, what are some of the drivers behind these adequacy challenges?
One of the biggest drivers is really to assess in an accurate and you know, proper fashion the value that an asset brings to the table, brings to the grid, and ensuring that it is fairly compensated. So that's the biggest challenge behind assessing the right quantum for adequacy to be implemented. So battery storage, as an example, has declining marginal benefit or value, capacity value, as duration is increased on a $1 per kilowatt a year basis. So that's one of the biggest trends that we see in CAISO, as an example, is what type of RA compensation are you going to be able to secure for your energy storage technology?
Yeah, I mean, complementing that, you know, adequacy, like, I mean, Cyrus had mentioned earlier, I mean, the sort of the standard methodology is this ELCC methodology, and it requires a lot of modeling and simulation and to determine, you know, how much each type of asset is going to contribute to the reliability of the grid. And you run, you know, a lot of Monte Carlo simulations, and we're all engineers, and, you know, we get excited about, you know, thousands of iterations and saying, you know, we're looking at a future where there's thousands of iterations and we're covering all these raises in demand and you know, all these outages, and, you know, we're incorporating different profiles of renewable energy. But one thing that's important is that in that methodology, there's still a lot of challenges in actually executing it. And, you know, we run, you know, ELCC simulations with models going into the future. And for example, if one's not careful, and there's still not a lot of, you know, consensus on how to do this, if one's not careful, you might, you know, let's say you say, I'm going to run a simulation where I raise the demand. That's what you do in the ELCC. You said the demand is going to be greater, and I'm going to have different renewable energy generation profiles. So you run a scenario where you raise the demand and the system reacts well, and you calculate the value of that capacity. But then you look at the operations of the system at that point in time, and you look that you're dispatching diesel units at full capacity. Does that make any sense? Is that really going to happen in the market? How do you consider that, right? Are diesel units going to be generating at full capacity to satisfy those changes in demand? No, it's really uneconomic to do that, first of all. Second of all, maybe those diesel units are just sitting there for years, and, you know, they're not going to be able to supply whenever they're needed or they're called upon, even if you have a lot of megawatts installed. And so really improving this ELCC methodology to look at different scenarios and modeling them in a way that makes sense. I think there's still a lot of work to be done there and improving that. And we saw it. I mean, we saw it in ERCOT, right? I mean, we saw it in ERCOT, and there was an unexpected scenario where we had a snowstorm that was once in a lifetime, or something that rarely happens in Texas. And there was a lot of things that happened, and there was a lot of units that went out that probably the guy doing the modeling for the ELCC would never consider that scenario, right? And so we have to start thinking about how to incorporate those scenarios, so whenever we run those simulations, the real value of that capacity is reflected. And then essentially, because what you're calculating is like a percentage, that capacity is contributing to the reliability issues. And if that percentage is too low because you're not really thinking well about the future, then the payment's not going to be good enough to incentivize the investment. But if that a percentage is nice enough and it's real enough and it considers enough scenarios and the reality of what could happen, then the payment might be good enough to incentivize investment.
Thank you for that, Donny. And you also, you in a dual role, you also answered the question in the chat there. So that's why we like having you on. So
I didn't even look at the question. I'm glad
so we've talked about what some of the constraints of capacity markets are, but constraints can also be in terms of the interaction of the storage and capacity markets. Like you touched on it a bit there, Donny, but Cyrus, I'm curious what some of the limits of long duration storage in capacity markets are, and how utilities can best leverage it to have a healthier grid.
Utilities will be the earlier adopters of longer term duration storage as they deal with retiring fossil fuels, peaking capacities, and increasing renewable penetration. But we do need to see strong economic incentives to build longer duration storage. It really comes down to the compensation mechanism for that additional duration that's being provided to the grid. So that's the biggest hurdle to overcome before seeing more and more longer duration technologies being commissioned and operating.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Cyrus. I mean, we've been traditionally, right, in power markets, the king was the energy market. 90%, 95% of the market was energy, or it could be up to that, right? Energy was king, right? But now what's happening is there's a paradigm shift, right? Where actually ancillary services, short-term reliability, because you have so much variability and constraints that are happening into the system, that this short-term variability and ancillary services are becoming more important. But ancillary services are always going to be a small percentage of the market, because in the end, it's covering shorter-term stuff. It's like what happens with the frequency, the shorter duration. But what is interesting now is I think there's a shift, right, where we have to think about, the energy market. Energy is going to become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper with renewables. The LCOEs are going down like crazy, essentially. They bid zero into the market. I mean, or they could bid negative prices because they have no production cost, essentially. And so the energy market is sort of losing, being king. And in the end, a market that is going to become very important is how we think about adequacy and capacity markets to basically supply, additional income to these generators in order to be able to install and be there in the future. And the pure function of this capacity market or these adequacy mechanisms is sort of like an insurance policy, right? And so there's a lot of learning that we have to do in order to say, how do we price that insurance into the grid, right? How much capacity are we willing to pay for? What are we willing to tolerate? The whole analysis and need for capacity in this ELCC methodology starts with a loss of load expectation. What are your expectations of loss of load? How much unserved energy are you willing to tolerate in the grid? And based on that, you say, okay, let's, do all these modeling simulations, crazy stuff, engineers, we do, we love to get into them and figure out what the price of that. But there's still a lot to learn because, first of all, we're learning a lot about, what does it mean to operate in a world with high integration of renewable energy? What does it mean in a world where thermal assets, which were the traditional assets, are being retired? What does also mean to operate in a world where climate changes are affecting the way that potentially the market is operating, right? Where you have droughts in locations where you have high hydro capacity. How do you deal with that, and how do you model that going into the future? Where you have temperatures going up, and that affects your capacity for generates to react to certain conditions, or you have fires and, all of a sudden part of your grid goes out. So I think there's a lot of learning. And over time, I think we're going to have to think more and more about how to use that capacity market and PPAs and other incentives to ensure that we have the reliability going into the future. Because I'm sure if you ask somebody in the US if they're willing to tolerate a week without energy, they probably, say no. There's no way we would tolerate that, right? That's like not right. It's essential, right? Or even a couple hours without energy. So there is a value in that, right? In having that insurance, so make sure that that occurs. And the more renewables we integrate, and the more uncertain our generation becomes, and the more constraints, those events could happen more often, right? So we need to put a price on that.
Yeah, that's very true. We had to deal with that. We had to deal with that up here in Washington State, because we've got the drought, and then there was a big heat wave, and we've had like week-long stretches of intense heat before, but this was the first time that Avista had to do scheduled blackouts that I can remember, because the reservoirs were low, and so yeah, that's very, very true. Okay, so my last question is, how can regulatory frameworks change to best take advantage of the storage solutions we've discussed? And you talked a little bit about how utilities can do that, but what about the regulatory frameworks?
I believe one approach or one solution could be to have different asset classes for different durations of storage. That would clarify a lot of the boundaries and compensation mechanisms between different use cases and applications of storage. So having that proper assessment of value and the added benefits of providing longer duration storage as opposed to short duration to the grid clarifies this gray zone that we've all been navigating in over the last few years on, well, what's the most optimal duration for storage? What's the use case? How bigger should we go at the most cost competitive standpoint? So I believe from a regulatory standpoint, being able to clarify between different asset classes would be one really clear way to go forward with this.
Yeah. I mean, complementing that, I think one way I look at it is capacity markets were conceived in a very simple manner, right? Making sure that we have enough capacity to meet the unserved energy that could happen when we have periods of maximum demand. And here we've been talking about, net load ramps and renewable energy integration. Dylan was talking about, droughts essentially, and having certain periods where there's lack of availability of hydro, for example, in a particular region. We're also talking about, uncertainty in the generation of storage. We're also starting to talk about, what do we do, not only between the days, but what do we do for the longer, making sure that we have the seasonal reliability as well. How do we do that? So to me, the solution is to look at the market and the problems and segment the market better, and make sure that, we say, look, okay, one service is satisfying the maximum demand, right, the peak, but another service is making sure that we have the ramping capacity in the system. Another service is that we have this seasonal reliability in the system. And so start thinking about the market in that way and segmenting in such a way to pay for those services. And that way also the market is going to be more efficient, right? Because there's all these flavors of storage technologies, right? You know, for example, pump hydro is probably going to be very efficient at taking on the ramp, right? It's like it to charge in the day and then discharge the night. But it might not be that great to build a reservoir to have like seasonal in a certain location, to have seasonal, the capability to have seasonal, you know, discharge essentially. Maybe the solution for that is actually going to be to use power fuels and hydrogen, or maybe it's going to be, you know, to use a different type of technology. So I think in segmenting the markets, sort of how we have done for ancillary services, we've thought a lot about that, right? We made different types of ancillary services to solve the market problems. And our capacity market is like, oh, we're solving one problem, which is maximum demand, right? That's what we're looking for in outages. Well, now there's all this other stuff that's happening, and we have to think about how to segment that market better. So we have more competition and we have the best solutions, take a piece of the pie. And if you can make it so that you can get a steady payment in those markets, then investment's going to happen, because you're going to be able to do project finance essentially, and you're going to be able to satisfy, you know, the debt service coverage ratio in a project finance, which is basically what you care about. And once you get a debt into the markets, there's going to be a lot more installation of these types of technologies.
Well, thank you for that, Donny, Cyrus. I really appreciate having you both on to get in the weeds on long duration storage. This is very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
And with that, I will pass it back to my friend Erin Autin, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the conference.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you, Donny and Cyrus. That was a very informative panel. And along with the topic of that panel, I think it's time for another trivia question here. So we're going to be putting up a poll. The question is 96% of global energy storage is from what? Is it supercapacitors, lithium-ion batteries, or pumped hydro storage? Give you all a few seconds to get your answers in. All right, we're gonna go ahead and close the poll. So 80% of people said pumped hydro storage, and you were correct. So smart audience we have here at Solar Storage Fest today. All right, I'm super excited to introduce our next session. So earlier this year, SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, announced their 2030 clean energy vision, which is a path to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions from their electric generation by 2030. And we're about to hear from the Chief Zero Carbon Officer, which I think is maybe my favorite title of any of our speakers that we've had at Solar Storage Fest, Lora Anguay. So please everyone welcome me, or join me in welcoming Lora to the stage.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me and see my screen. Good afternoon. I'm really excited and honored to be leading SMUD's Zero Carbon Energy Solutions team. And as SMUD's first Chief Zero Carbon Officer, I'm also really excited to share our plan with you. SMUD is probably the only utility to have this title in this department, at least at this point in time. We do expect that SMUD's 2030 zero carbon goal, and to send a strong message that we're serious about doing our part in the fight against climate change. So jumping on to the previous discussion that I was just listening to, wildfires in the West is really impacting our power supply. So even in the best laid out plans for resource adequacy, and I think we started at 15% additional RA to account for these types of conditions. I think in California it moved up to 17.5%. But even with those laid out plans, things that occur on the system can actually impact those plans. So this past weekend in California, the California-Oregon intertie was actually derated due to an active wildfire near the transmission lines. And this derate really impacted California's power supply. And our customers are in that camp of not wanting to be impacted without energy for more than an hour. So this weekend was really challenging, or this past week was really challenging because of that. So just wanted to share right there. So SMUD is located in Northern California, and we've been serving Sacramento for over 70 years. Today, we serve about 635,000 customers and a population of about 1.6 million people. So SMUD's publicly owned. We're community-owned, not-for-profit. Our board is not part of the city or another government agency. We do have a 7-member board of directors. They're elected by our customers, and they establish our policies and the values and sets our company's long-term direction. So SMUD's had a long history with solar energy efforts beginning more than 35 years ago when we installed our first utility scale solar array in 1984. At that time, the cost of solar was extremely high, and the 1 megawatt system at Rancho Seco was really one of the first utility scale demonstrations of a technology that prior to this had been confined to labs, space, and off-grid applications. Demonstrating it at scale was our effort to start to assess best practices for installation, learn about reliability and maintenance, inform the industry, and really drive down costs. Following that, a number of additional utility scale systems, we then launched our rooftop solar PV Pioneers program. And this was a program where SMUD actually owned the rooftop solar. We ran into some issues in terms of the warranties on customers' roofs and not wanting for us to own those systems. So we later transitioned away from the SMUD-owned program to an incentive-based program for customer-owned systems. So a program in which we incentivize the purchase of solar for our customers. In the early 2000s, we began to partner with home builders to integrate solar with energy efficiency measures in new construction. And from there, in 2007 to 2017, we transitioned to a 10-year program to begin to scale rooftop solar for our region. By the late 2000s, utility scale solar was finally reaching a price level where we felt like it made sense to invest in at scale. So SMUD monitored, and we were monitoring the success of the feed-in tariffs that were occurring in Germany. And so we launched a 100 megawatt program in 2010, and that was fully subscribed to immediately for feed-in tariffs at a cost that was 20 to 30% below what we were seeing to date. Throughout the decades, we had an active suite of educational offerings for our customers. And in 2015, we rolled out a campaign to help our customers understand the economics of solar, paired with their specific energy use. So that way they could make sure to make informed decisions when they were receiving offers from the solar vendors. And most recently in 2017, we rolled out the largest community solar program in the country, subscribing 140 megawatts of commercial solar in just over a year. At the time, more solar than we'd actually been able to put on rooftops in our previous 25 years of programs. So climate change is a pressing threat that's facing the world, our nation, and the region that we serve. Sacramento is one of the most polluted cities in the country. A recent report by the American Lung Association actually ranked the Sacramento area as the 6th worst in the nation based on the days of unhealthy and unsafe levels of air pollution. So not really a list that you want to be on. And for the last 4 years, Sacramento has received an air quality rating of an S. Asthma rates in children in the Sacramento area are 22% higher than the national average. Rising temperatures in our region has an adverse impact on our economy and underserved resources, and low-income communities are disproportionately impacted by air pollution and climate change. So working towards a clean environment brings benefits not only on a global scale, but also for us locally. These reduced emissions can improve our local air quality and help improve our overall health, especially in communities that suffer from the poorest air quality. At the end of 2020, as mentioned, our board of directors adopted a climate emergency declaration, which instructed our SMUD staff to take action in reducing our carbon emissions. And at the end of last year, our staff began working to develop SMUD's 2030 zero carbon plan. And this plan was approved by our board in April of this year. Our 2030 zero carbon plan is a historic milestone for SMUD. We're leading the way to a clean energy future. And looking back in 2010, we were the first utility in California to meet our 20% of energy through eligible renewable energy. And today we're one of the cleanest in the nation with 50% carbon-free energy. And of that, 33% is renewable. So in California, our large hydro generation does not count towards our renewable portfolio standards, which is how we can be at 50% carbon-free, but only 33% counting towards our RPS. In order to achieve one of the most ambitious goals of any large utility in the United States, we've developed our 2030 carbon plan to map out the flexible pathways to reach 100% zero carbon emissions in our power supply by 2030. So we're at the start of our 9-year journey. This is a snapshot of our zero carbon plan. There's 4 key areas of focus within our plan. So first is the natural gas repurposing. Second is the proven clean technology section. New technologies and business models is the third, and then financial with all of these goals, with the goal of maximizing community benefits while achieving our goal of zero carbon by 2030. So this gets into a little more detail, or tries to on a single slide. So the top of this chart shows the natural gas generation repurposing plan. And today we have 5 natural gas plants that provide low cost, reliable power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from our plants is essential to reaching our goal of zero by 2030. So we're focused on reimagining our existing generation portfolio to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions through retirement, retooling, and using renewable fuels. To drastically reduce operations and emissions, what we plan to do, and you can see it on the chart between 2023 and 2025, is to retire 2 of those plants. So McClellan and Campbell are the 2 plants that we're looking to retire. And retirement of these 2 plants would mean leaving 3 remaining natural gas plants. We plan to retool these remaining plants, and this could mean upfront carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and/or biofuels. And in all transparency, at this point in time, we really don't know what the answer is. But we're going to continue to research emerging alternatives as we build out our plans for later years. In the proven clean technology area, we do have some projects that are already in flight, and we will expand the use of existing carbon-free energy technologies like wind, solar, hydro, biomass, geothermal, battery storage, and demand response. And you can already see here again that we do have some additional projects that are already in flight, and that's the installation of another 350 megawatts of utility scale solar, 105 megawatts of utility scale battery storage, and we're adding another 91 megawatts of wind generation to an existing wind farm that we already have by 2025. And we expect that all of these projects, along with the addition of customer-sited resource, will allow us to retire the 2 natural gas plants that I spoke about in the section above. And as we get into 2025 and beyond, these projects are not fully fleshed out at this point in time, so it gets a little more gray as we get out to the further years. While these proven carbon-free technologies aren't fully capable of achieving our 2030 zero carbon goal, we believe that this, along with the customer-sited resources, that we can get to about 90% of the way there. So that last 10% is really unknown at this point. When we explore the new technology and business model section, we're going to continue to explore emerging technologies like hydrogen and methane, long duration battery storage, and carbon sequestration. We're going to continue to watch for new technologies that are either currently unknown or not ready to scale due to price or reliability or other factors. This work will help us to identify potential partnerships and business models like virtual power plants and launch pilot projects and programs to test and prove out new and emerging technologies and develop paths for prioritizing technology adoption and scaling. And then finally, in the financial section, we have a goal of minimizing our rate increases to align with inflation, which is a challenge in and of itself. This is probably going to be one of the biggest challenges. So in order to do this, we are really actively looking to find organizational efficiencies within SMUD to help reduce our costs. We're also actively pursuing external grants and partnerships and really looking for new business models. SMUD's zero carbon plan is best achieved by finding mutually beneficial solutions, and we have reaffirmed our commitment to our community of being inclusive, supporting regional innovation, advancing clean tech jobs, and attracting clean energy investments to the region through collaborative partnerships. So we get a lot of questions regarding what's the role of customer-sided solar or customer-sided resources in the 2030 plan. And we do expect that we'll need to see continued growth of customer-sided resources. In fact, we're anticipating that we're going to need 2 to 3 times the amount of customer-sided solar that we have today. And in order to help retire those 2 peaker plants, it's important that we pair that customer-sided solar with storage. And this will provide both grid benefits as well as resiliency and help us to achieve our 2030 plan. In order to do so, though, we're transitioning away from our solar-only incentive plans, and we're now moving forward with enhanced incentives for solar paired with storage, and encouraging customers to participate in our virtual power plant program, our VPP program, and then also giving us the ability to dispatch those resources. As we look forward, we truly believe that in order to build an inclusive zero carbon economy, that we all need to work together to make this goal come to fruition. We need to partner with our customers, the community in the region, the private sector, policymakers and regulators to help build the environmentally friendly and sustainable future that we're seeking. For SMUD, it's not just about getting to zero carbon emissions for our electricity alone, but it's also about doing it in a way that invests in our local community, including attracting external investments for innovation and leveraging policy to support our goals. As such, you'll see, we see all of these groups not only as key stakeholders in our 2030 zero carbon plan, but we also see them as partners in helping us to actually achieve it. So in closing, SMUD's working to reduce its carbon emissions to help reduce climate change, but it's much more than that. Importantly, we're staying true to our roots as a community-owned, not-for-profit organization. Our zero carbon plan is hoping to deliver wide-reaching benefits to our community with a focus on equity and strengthening our communities. The other benefits are far-reaching, from improving air quality, overall community health, to job creation. And by taking a leadership role in addressing climate change, we're really hoping to make the Sacramento region an example to follow and attract climate-friendly businesses that want to grow. And so it's not going to be easy by any means, and we don't have all of the answers. As I said, our plan is flexible, and we don't have all of it laid out at this point in time. There's too many unknowns in technology and things that can change. But we know that we're going to get closer to achieving our goals simply by trying. And as we move forward with this plan, we are keeping in mind that we're investing in the future and we're building for tomorrow. So with that, I was going to open it up for questions.
Thank you, Lora. And yeah, I just want to remind everyone in the audience to share their questions with Lora. I do have 1 or 2 questions for you that I'll start with. So my first question is, what sort of reaction have you guys gotten from the general public, like your customers? Are people excited about it? Has it been well received, or are people a little more skeptical? What are you hearing from people?
So we do have a mix of what we're hearing. A lot of what we have that attend our board meetings traditionally have been a lot of the environmental groups. So obviously that's swayed in one direction. And then not a lot of our customers, our everyday customers, are attending those board meetings. So we did spend a lot of time going out to the communities and making sure that they understood what we were doing, and held a number of community events in order to keep them informed, and had surveys to get their input afterwards as well, after they heard what we were doing. And so far it's been very positive. I think people are excited about the things that we're doing. What we are hearing is that focus on financial and making sure that the rates stay low is extremely important. So obviously to address climate change and the air quality within our region, I think is important to a lot of our customers, but reliability and affordability is also just as equally important.
Thank you. And then my second question is, why 2030? You know, it's even more ambitious than Biden's new sort of new plan of 2035. How did you all kind of land on that 2030 year?
Yeah, so the date actually was set before the Biden administration took office. So it was set last year, and our board really set a target of net zero is where they wanted us to land. And so being SMUD, we wanted to go a little more aggressive and see if we could meet absolute zero. So not absolute, or not net zero, but absolute zero. So the date was really there from our board. I'm not sure how they came up with that date, but I think we are calling it our moonshot, and I think there's a recognition that what we're doing is further ahead of most utilities and even where the country wants to go. And I think the idea is for us to push ourselves and see if we can do this, but again, in the context of making sure that our system is reliable and affordable.
And I know SMUD recently also just launched the Mobility Center in Sacramento. How does that kind of play into the plans of reaching the 2030 goal? Or can you just maybe talk a little bit about that Mobility Center?
Yeah, so we are a founder of the Sacramento Mobility Center, or the California Mobility Center, sorry, the CMC. We do have regional partners, UC Davis, Sac State, CSU, Sac State is a partner in that as well. And what we're doing there is attracting startups to enter into our region and start their businesses around electric vehicles and electrifying the automobiles within our region. And again, it's centered around improvement of air quality as well, and economic development in terms of bringing new businesses into our region. I think it really ties into the 2030 in terms of electrification of our fleet and electrification of the vehicles within our service territory. The 2030 plan specifically is more about redoing our power supply and cleaning up our power supply. But we do also have plans to clean up the emissions within our day-to-day operations, such as our fleet as well. So we are working on a plan for that as well right now.
Great, thank you. All right, and then I've got one last question here. So I mentioned your title at the beginning of the session. I don't know if there are any other Chief Zero Carbon officers at utilities. But I imagine there will be. I imagine many utilities will be following in your footsteps. So what advice would you have for other utilities who might not have that role yet, but would like to, eventually have someone create that role? And how did you guys go about doing it? And yeah, just what kind of advice would you have for other utilities?
Yeah, I think the purpose behind the name and the new department was really around, again, wanting to make sure that we made a statement, not just to our community and to our board, that we showed the commitment to our board and our community, but also to the industry as a whole, and wanting to be that example. Our CEO, Paul Lau, is a visionary and always has been, and I think he's wanting to make sure that we set that vision, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. And I think the business unit and the way that was formed and the groups that were pulled together, at the time when we were doing this, I didn't know that you could, in my mind, I couldn't imagine how you would pull the right resources together into one business unit to accomplish something so large. And while there's work that I think is going to happen across the organization to help get us there, we really did pull together all of the pieces around power generation. And so I have the traditional power generation group in terms of design, construction, maintenance, and transition of the power generation assets. I also have energy trading and assets as part of my team, energy trading and contracts, sorry, as part of my team, and commodity settlement. So again, the procurement and settlement of energy transactions that, again, we're wanting to transition to clean energy resources. But then the new area for me that's interesting that I didn't think of is really we pulled into an area that traditionally would have reported into the chief customer officer, so the customer side of the business. And I think that that's really important if you want to start taking advantage of those customer-sided resources and have them help be part of the solution, that program design and development pertaining to distributed generation needed to come over as well. And I think that alignment hasn't happened before within our utility. I'm sure it's probably not there in others. And so I would advise that be a key component as well if people are looking to do that. I think we also pulled in responsibility for grants and partnerships and research and development. So wanting to make sure, again, that we're looking at the emerging technologies that are coming forward and then actively pursuing any grants and partnerships that are out there to help offset some of the cost.
Thank you. Well, you've got your work cut out for you, but I think that you guys can handle it, and we will be following closely at Zpryme and look forward to hearing back from you, as the year goes on. So thank you so much, Lora, for joining us today. We have something a little bit different in store. So we're not actually going to take a traditional break today. We've got my friend and colleague, Emma Garcia, who I'd like to invite up to the stage. Emma is a yoga teacher. She teaches a weekly yoga class for our Zpryme colleagues, and they're really great. She also teaches some other classes, so maybe you can find her somewhere out there. But today she is going to lead a mindfulness session for us. So definitely take a break from your work, and it'll give your mind a break from all the conversations we've been having today. But stick around and hear from Emma as she leads us through a mindfulness exercise.
Thank you, Erin. And thanks a lot for conversation with Laura. That was a great conversation. Really admirable to see SMUD's leadership and just the progressive action that they've taken to incorporate the Chief Zero Carbon Officer. So think of this moment now as kind of a time to reset. You can think of it maybe as recess, kind of an opportunity to just relax. You are welcome to turn your cameras on if you want, because it's also a good opportunity to connect. But I understand if that's not accessible for you at the moment. You don't have to, obviously. I'm going to focus on meditation that will bring awareness to the solar plexus. And the solar plexus is one of the chakras in Hatha Yoga. It's in Sanskrit, it's called the Manipura, and Mani means jewel. It can also mean resplendent or radiant, and Pura can be translated to mean many things, as many Sanskrit words can be. One of the translations can be abode, like a home, a fortress. So you can think of the solar plexus as an abode of energy or an energy hub. It's your home of radiance. And there are exercises that you can do to help replenish that radiance and to help promote the capacity, the body's capacity to store that energy. It's located just north of your belly button and south of your rib cage. And you can visualize it as a sphere. So chakra means wheel. So you can visualize it as a sphere. The color that's associated with this energy hub is the color yellow, which reminds us of the sun, hence the term solar plexus. And the element associated with the solar plexus chakra is fire. So fire can potentially make you think of the power to transform, the heat that's required maybe to change one thing into another. So what I'd like to invite you to do now is to just take a comfortable seat. And honestly, if you feel like you want to get up and stretch before we start this, you're welcome to do that too. We're not in any rush. So once you've established a comfortable seat, and generally that's feet planted on the earth to create a sense of connection and grounding. The pelvis is established in a comfortable seat, so you can feel both butt bones resting, the hips can relax and release into your seat. And then you're in you want to place yourself in a position where your spine can naturally be at its like natural length. So there's not too much effort. And you want to lean back a little bit. So once you've established a comfortable seat, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and just begin to feel what you feel. So you can feel maybe beginning at the base of the feet, your feet grounded. And then bring awareness to your pelvis, the connection that your pelvis is making with your seat, your chair, your cushion, whatever you're sitting on. And bring awareness to the base of your spine. And from the base of the spine, I want you to imagine that your inhale is beginning, and you're going to breathe in to lift and draw energy up the length of your spine towards your heart, and hold your head high. And then as you exhale, I want you to imagine that the exhale is beginning at the crown of your head, and there's a softening, a releasing, letting go of tension, releasing stress, thoughts. And do that twice more, visualizing the breath beginning at the base of the spine. Take a deep breath in and allow your energy to rise toward your heart. Hold your head high. And maintaining that fullness as you exhale, let go of any tension. Once more, just like that, inhale fully. Think of the inner body brightening as you fill up with the vital energy that the breath supplies. And then think of the outer body softening as you exhale and let go of tension. And now take a moment just to watch your breath. So just returning to a natural breath. Now notice if you have any tension around your face. And so we'll just scan the body from the top down this time, and I'm going to encourage you to release any tension. So if you notice that there's tension at your brow, this is a common area where we hold tension. So think of this spot right in between your brow, right at the center of your forehead. Allow the little muscles around that space to soften and relax. And then bring awareness to your cheeks, your jaw, letting all the little muscles of the face relax. And see if you can't contribute any more sense of like release and relaxing, maybe through the shoulders, the hands, letting the bones in your legs and in your pelvis feel heavy and grounded. As I mentioned, the solar plexus or Manipura chakra is associated with your capacity to create, your capacity to transform. So it's a transformative power that you can ignite. So as you watch your breath, I'm going to invite you to now bring your awareness to this space right above your navel and below your ribs, and visualize this energy hub, a sun basically inside you. And it's a beautiful yellow. Perhaps you can recall some of the sunsets that were shared on social. Perhaps you can recall a sunset that was especially moving for you. And that color, that lovely yellow, is now permeating that space between your navel and your ribs. And then even visualize that yellow, that hub of energy radiating now out into all parts of your body. And notice what that might shift for you in the way that you're sitting as you explore that sensation of energy emanating from your solar plexus chakra and radiating out to all parts of your body. Even at a cellular level, maybe you can imagine the cells being transformed into this lovely, radiant color of yellow. So just watch that as you watch the breath. And the breath becomes a vehicle that's carrying this energy to all parts of your being. The solar plexus is also associated with your passions, that which energizes you, that which makes you feel most alive. And when do you feel most alive? What are you doing? And how does it feel? And for the next few moments, I'll lead us through a sort of, I guess you can think of it like a mantra, right? Where I will encourage you to take a breath in, and I'll give you a guiding thought to contribute to that breath. Take a deep breath in. With my inhale, I am confident. Letting go of tension as you exhale. Deep breath in. With my inhale, I am powerful, full of energy. Releasing tension on the exhale. With my inhale, I am passionate, radiant. Softening as you exhale. I am confident. I am full of energy. I am passionate and fully alive. Beautiful. Watch your breath. Enjoy your breath. So we're going to shift gears a bit now. And as you breathe, I'm going to encourage you to do a subtle exercise. It's an abdominal exercise. Nothing to be stressed out about. You don't have to do it if you're not feeling it. That's fine too. So on the inhale, I'm going to encourage you to relax as you inhale. So relax your pelvic floor, relax your pelvis, relax your hips, your belly as you inhale. Allow yourself to get kind of big circumferentially, like a globe. And as you exhale, I want you to draw your ribs toward one another and magnetize your front body to your back body. And there's even kind of a lifting energy from the pelvic floor up toward the navel. You're pushing your air out through the nostrils as you exhale. So on the inhale, relaxing, allowing your belly to soften and getting big as a yellow globe expands in your abdomen. And then on the exhale, draw everything in. So squeezing side to center, front to back, pushing the air out. Again, relax as you inhale. Feel yourself opening up to the vitality and the power of the breath. And then embrace that energy as you exhale. And even expand it. Embrace it so that you can expand it. Twice more. Relax, inhale, receive. And then as you exhale, feel the embrace of energy Drawing front body to back body, side to center. Relax, inhale. Belly is soft. And then on the exhale, push the air out and give yourself a squeeze. And think of squeezing your internal organs. And then as you squeeze in, think of that energy expanding out. As if you were taking an orange and squeezing it to get all the juice out. Good, and now relax your belly, relax your shoulders, return to a natural breath. Maybe even allow the beginning of a smile to rest on your face so that you can feel even more at ease and more rest and more at peace. When you're ready, you can begin to open your eyes. Good. Thank you for joining me. And hopefully you found that of some value. Maybe you can take this practice away for you. Call upon it anytime that you're feeling fatigued, lethargic, lacking creativity and energy. Connect to this energy hub that resides within you. It's always there. It's never depleted. We just forget that it's available. So I'm now going to turn this over to Erin, I suppose. She's going to lead us back to a conversation with Joyce on regulating for tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That was great. I think we sometimes forget that it's okay to just sit for about 5 minutes, 5 to 15 minutes, and breathe and relax, and it's not going to throw our whole day off. It'll actually help us get back on track. So hope you all enjoyed that, and thank you, Emma, for leading us through that. Okay, before we get to our next session, I've got one more trivia question for you. The question is, the cost per watt of a solar cell has fallen by how much since 1977? Give you all a few more seconds to get your answers in. All right, I think we can close the poll. Oh, there we go. 75% of you said 99%, and that is correct. So again, our audience today is on the ball with these trivia questions. Great job, y'all. Okay, I am very excited to bring my colleague Joyce Deuley to the stage. Joyce is Zpryme's Senior Research Analyst. She's going to be having a conversation with two wonderful speakers who will talk about the role that regulation plays in shaping the communities of the future and how that will impact solar and storage and other renewable energies. So Joyce, I will hand things over to you.
Hi, Erin and everyone else. Thank you so much for tuning in to SSF 21 Day 2. I'm really excited to bring up Brian Bradford with Oracle and Carrie Zalewski with the state of Illinois. Before we get started into the questions and kind of what the topic's going to be about, I would love to have Carrie introduce herself, and then we'll move over to Brian. Carrie?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carrie Zalewski. I am the chair of the Illinois Commerce Commission. I have been in this role for a little bit over 2 years. A bit about my background: I went to school for undergrad for engineering, and then I went straight to law school. And since then, I have been working in the environmental and energy regulatory space for over 15 years. I was appointed by Governor J.B. Pritzker and currently serving in the role. I'm grateful to be here. This is my first Solar Fest, but I can already tell that this is my type of festival. I'm honored to be speaking with you and to be on this panel with Brian.
It's so great to have you. Thank you again for joining us. And Brian.
Sure. So my name is Brian Bradford, Vice President of Oracle Industry Strategy, focusing on the utility space. Been in the space a very long time. I actually started my career with a company called Enron, which was a long, long time ago in a land far, far away, but spent my first initial parts out of school there. Spent some time at Eversource. So I actually was inside of the utility. I did some work in the clean tech space back with a company called GridPoint about 12, 15 years ago. Also was with General Electric for a few years. But like I said, for the past 6 years have been with Oracle and focusing on sort of our portfolio of capabilities for the utility space. So very happy to be here and look forward to the discussion.
I think it's going to be really awesome. And thank you again for joining us today. So, for the audience, as you know, we're going to be covering, how renewables are really making impacts in the industry. What role do regulators play in economic development? How some of this has shifted since COVID-19. If you do have questions, please feel free to drop them anytime in the chat. We definitely want to make sure that we maximize Carrie and Brian's time today and make sure that we get your questions answered. So don't be shy. Kind of kicking us off, Brian, there's some very large infrastructure and clean energy projects coming out of the Biden administration. Do you feel that the regulatory space is ready to deal with the rising wave of EVs and renewables?
Well, let me first say that, like I said, I've been in the space 25 years, and am I excited? Yes, I'm super excited. I think there's going to be a lot of change coming with the Biden administration's focus around the clean energy space. Now, the question is regulatory ready? Are utilities ready? Are even consumers ready? And I think the answer to that is that I don't think we really have a choice. This thing is coming. And I think we're in a situation where, quite honestly, I think all of us are going to have a lot of work to do to sort of figure out how we're going to handle a lot of this stuff. And I say that because renewables have taken over by storm. There's no question. There's DER everywhere. And with DER everywhere, that means, bi-directional flow of electricity. That means, the traditional utility cash register of electrons flowing in one direction and then getting paid with electrons on this side sort of going the opposite direction means that whole dynamic of how the utility makes money and the utility's revenues, all of that stuff changes. And so, I think it's great to have more and more renewables from a carbon standpoint, but have we really structured the utilities in a way that they're going to be successful in that new world? And I think that's a big question that still is TBD. Then what gets really exciting is when you think about vehicles, which quite honestly, it's essentially a mobile distributed energy resource. It can charge and consume power, but in many cases it can also discharge and give power back to the grid. And when you think about that capability, you then have to think about, well, how do we coordinate based on the vehicle's location? Is it on a a network or a part of the grid that's capable? If we have too many on that particular network or that particular circuit, are they going to charge or are they going to discharge? What's the timing of the best interconnection at those times? I mean, the value of that storage capability to the utility whenever it's in a brown out event. And so how do we communicate information to the customer? What are the price signals? What are the payments for driving around the country and plugging in wherever you want to plug in? I mean, there's so much that I think, is yet to be when you think about all of that. And yeah, are we ready? No, I think, like I said, we all are going to have to really sort of be flexible. And I say everyone, meaning the regulators, the utilities, and the customers, because there's a ton of this that we just don't quite know yet. And I think it's going to take us some time to figure it out. But, the good news is I think everyone is sort of, lifting their head up and seeing this sort of coming on the horizon, and the potential of where this could go. And I think if we get some very clear and direct messaging, at the national level as to where things are going, I think that'll be huge for the industry. But it's crazy exciting in the sense that, what used to be, yes, you still want to be reliable. Yes, you want to still kind of do all the things you did before, but, the onslaught of all these different challenges are really making, a need for, I think, significant change in the model, in the structure. And I think, as I said, a lot of that is still TBD.
Thank you, Brian. Carrie, would love to get your perspective on EVs and renewables and what's changing.
Sure, I think, of course, Brian is spot on. Before I begin, I always have to say that, first, these are my comments and my comments alone and don't necessarily reflect those of the Illinois Commerce Commission. I am going to speak high level, perhaps, of just reference open cases, but I'm not allowed to speak in detail because of ex parte considerations. Agree with Brian, very excited about the leadership at the federal level. This is a very exciting time to be in energy. And I have to also note that we have very strong leadership in Illinois under Governor Pritzker. He's calling for 1 million electric vehicles in the state by 2030 and 100% clean energy generation by 2050. These are lofty and wonderful goals, but of course, how we get there is a whole nother issue. It's no secret, it's a fact that regulation always lags innovation. This is just something that we always have to grapple with. Still, I think as a regulator, it's important, it's incumbent upon regulators to stay engaged and try to understand kind of what's coming our way. Of course, we can't understand and know all the innovation, but to try to follow along and make sure that it's not the first time that we're seeing or hearing about it when it's filed before us. I do think that regulators can play an important role in ensuring that the rise of renewables happens smoothly and with fewer barriers. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what we're working on in Illinois. With regard to rulemaking, we have a rule open interconnection rule. And of course, it is an open docket, but the rule was opened with the stated intention to remove unnecessary barriers and burdens for developers on the interconnection of DERs to keep pace with innovation and evolution in the industry. Also, we're closely watching in Illinois Order 2222, both what's coming down from FERC, but of course at the RTO level. I serve on the organization of MISO states, and I'm very engaged. I serve as a DER liaison, following and tracking Order 2222. I think the new order is going to bring new challenges as we try to bring DERs into the wholesale market in a more robust way. But with challenges, I think are also opportunities. I think a big important piece of Order 2222 is thinking about data. I think it's important for regulators to consider how data access will play a role in DER aggregation and potentially in demand response aggregation. And having a robust DER market, I think, is good. It's good for Illinois. I think it's good for everyone. So I'm excited to see what comes out of this order. And finally, I think that there are other important components of how regulators can help prepare the rising waves of EV and renewables through things like rate design and pilots. So I think that we have a long way to go, but I think that regulators have tools and should use tools to help with the rollout of renewables and EVs.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I mean, the utility space is a highly regulated industry, and we can't escape the role of regulators, and we can't escape the role of the utilities and the innovators as well. They all have to work hand in hand, and sometimes that can be difficult because they don't always work on the same timelines, but it's necessary and it's good work, and it's really exciting to have you both here today to represent each side of the table. So Carrie, you have a lot of experience looking at projects as they scale. What challenges do we need to think about, or what can occur when rolling out clean energy projects at scale?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think the first and most obvious is reliability. We've been talking about reliability for a long time, the intermittency and designing the grid and rates and other regulatory frameworks. I think reliability is the most important role of a regulator. We're very excited for renewables to come online, but it's all for naught if the grid doesn't work. And then of course, layering on top more and more extreme weather just exacerbates the problem. So this is something that we really need, that innovation to fill in and to help us tackle reliability issues. I also want to talk about, I think transmission comes to mind. So building out transmission, I think we can all agree, is an important piece to making sure the grid is ready for all of these new renewables, and using the grid in a way that it wasn't designed to be used in. How we roll it out, though, is really the problem. The challenge of how much, answering the question of how much transmission, where we place the transmission, and of course who's going to pay for it. There are a lot of challenges, particularly for regulators, as we think through siting of transmission and very robust conversations about cost allocation of these new transmission lines. I'm excited to see the support coming down from the federal level. I'm looking forward to see how the infrastructure money, if and when it flows, how this can help with building out transmission. Of course, costs are a big part of it. And as a regulator, I'm always thinking how this impacts the consumer, but particularly how it impacts low income customers. We know that socially disadvantaged and low income customers are often most impacted by climate change. So we have to ensure that they're part of the clean energy revolution, and that they have access to potentially cost-saving benefits of DERs and EVs and energy efficiency. These are all really, really important. In Illinois, we have something called the Solar for All program, and this is as we meet our renewable portfolio standard and we procure renewable energy credits on behalf of customers, there's a program that ensures that low-income customers have the ability to participate in activating solar energy with no upfront costs, for example. And I think the final challenge I want to mention that we've already touched on is pace. First, pace of technology. I know that there is a lot of movement in the innovation of batteries, but we need a cheap, effective battery where the entire supply chain comes from the United States yesterday. And so this is something that I know that is continuously in the works. I'm looking forward to see what comes up in this space. And then, of course, the pace of regulation, which often lags behind innovation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Brian.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think the biggest challenge for renewables, and particularly renewables at scale, is, and I think this sort of follows on what Carrie was saying, but, who's taking the risk? And is it something where the utility needs to take on more risk? Is it something where the local community needs to take on the risk? Is it something where third-party investors need to take on some of the risk? But yeah, I mean, there's a ton of cost and investment that is required. And in most cases, utilities are pretty boxed in as to the risks that they're, traditionally been allowed to take and not allowed to take. And so, this whole conversation around the risk versus the reward to, which stakeholders, whether it's the consumer or the investor or the community or the utility or the whoever, all of that really, I think, starts to challenge big projects in getting done, unless it comes out of the blue and there's an independent developer that just says, I'm going to do it regardless of the challenges and going after it. But I do think that there's a real opportunity to sort of revisit some of the I won't say restrictions, but just the way the regulatory framework hits the utility and how the utilities think about its role. I do think there's an opportunity, particularly as we get further down the path with renewables and cars and everything else, to rethink some of those rules and some of those restrictions around what the utility can and cannot do. So, yeah, I'm excited about the scale that we've had. I mean, there's a project. EverSource had a project, the wind project that they had in. I know we're talking about solar, but the wind project that they had off the coast of the Cape. I mean, that thing took, they started that when I was there back in 2000 and a long time ago, 2008. So that took a long time to get done. And it's a great project now, which is great, but it's just, there's a lot of challenges that I think if we could break down some of those rules and break down some of those requirements, we could, spur things on a little faster.
Thank you, Brian. We did have a couple of questions come in. And I think the first one is kind of directed to Carrie, which is, aren't microgrids potentially outside the reach of the utilities regulation?
So in Illinois, we did approve a microgrid by the utility under a pilot program. There was some DOE money that was available, and the utility came to the commission to ask for permission to go forward with this pilot program. And it was one of the first utility scale microgrids in the United States. It's currently it's being done in phases. It's in the Bronzeville neighborhood. It's in the city of Chicago. It includes solar and storage. And what's under the pilot, the utility is required to file the learnings with the commission. So this is an opportunity to learn how the microgrid interacts with the main grid. Also, what's interesting is that the microgrid is also interacting with another microgrid that's at the IIT campus. And so another opportunity to learn. So in Illinois, we did grant the ability to put in a microgrid by the utility under a pilot program.
Awesome, thank you. Brian, do you have anything to add to that question?
No, I think that's good. Yeah, nothing new
Cool.
on that one.
Sweet. All right, so the next question then that came in had to do with electrification of everything, and the question is, won't the grid load be about 3 times larger with the electrification of everything, and how long does it take to build, I guess, or to be prepared for that kind of usage? Brian, if you want to take that one first.
Sure. I mean, I think to that question, yeah, I mean, we're increasing the load on the grid for sure. And I think historically, the utility will find a circuit that it's got a problem with, and it'll fix that circuit. Now, whether or not that's the best way to optimize the resources required to fix everything and to do it on a macro scale, probably not the case. But, I think and hope that these are some of the bigger issues that, the national level, the infrastructure conversation that are going on right now can really address, because these circuits were never designed to have 5 electric vehicles sort of come on all at the same time intermittently throughout the day whenever the consumer wants, and you can think about that demand just changing dramatically, relative to people's use of the cars, and the fact people aren't going back into the office, that leaves them with, obviously a higher residential demand. There's so many things that I think, need to be sort of figured out on that. But the grid was not designed to do what we're doing. Was not designed to do what we're doing to it right now. And I think there's a large conversation and investment that'll be required to make it, make it to the level that is needed for where we're heading in the market.
Thank you. Carrie, do you have anything to add?
I don't have a whole lot to add. As far as predicting the length of time, I think that's something that I would not be able to do. But I will note that, in addition to building out the grid, there are other ways that I think everyone is thinking about it. For example, in Illinois, we have a pilot for time of use rates to help shave the peaks. And we also have a docket that was just decided speaking to EV owners and how to send the right price signals so that we encourage charging at off-peak times. So it's not going to solve the problem of the new load coming on, but it's meant to kind of address and to lessen the load, hopefully, on the grid.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you so much for the questions. If you have any more, please go ahead, feel free to drop them in. We'd love to get them answered. Moving on, community solar, especially when we're talking about renewables, is becoming more and more of a conversation piece. Brian, what are your thoughts on community solar?
So I know you guys had a session earlier today on it, but I was unable to attend. But my perspective and my view is that yes, utilities have to be involved. If not, I mean, honestly, driving community solar products and projects. I mean, you think about it, they have the information to optimize the location, based on the supply and demand and where the grid, could get benefit from the just operational side of where these things could be placed. They can help optimize the investment of resources, and helping ensure that the money is going into the right, activities. The other key point is optimizing sort of the customer communication and interaction. I mean, those customers that are willing to buy the, community solar or accept community solar, I mean, that whole dialogue and conversation will need to be done central. And in many cases, yes, the utility CIS or customer experience systems will be able to ensure that that solar plant that went out, in your community is available, and the benefits and the values and all that stuff, all that being communicated to the customer, through their bill. That's a huge piece to getting the communities to embrace these things. And yeah, I mean, the operator of the grid is the nexus of all this information, of all the points of who wants it, who doesn't want it, where is it needed, where is it not needed. It's that central owner of information that I think can really, have the biggest impact and help move things along. So, yeah, I mean, if we're all in agreement that we need to do more community solar, yes, utilities need to be front and center in that conversation. Because if you have third parties, which I think are great, third parties coming in and doing it, there always still is that third party will go find the cheapest place to put it, but it might be on a circuit that doesn't make sense. I mean, there's so many different things that you got to think about as you do this. And I think the utility really has the bird's eye view of all of that. So I think they should be a part of it.
Thank you. Speaking of, utilities kind of being the nexus for these things in communities, COVID-19 pandemic definitely hit communities incredibly hard throughout the world. Do you think that utilities and commissions, Brian, do you think that utilities and commissions have a broader role to play in economic recovery from the pandemic?
Yes. And let me explain that. And that's a tough statement to make because there's so many elements to it. But when you think about what COVID has done, and you think about the impact it's had on our communities, and granted, because of the way we're recovering, you got the K recovery where there's certain groups of people that are, rising and certain groups of people that are falling. So there is some dynamics there that I can't quite, from an economic standpoint, figure out how to deal with. But when you think about the large bad debt expense that COVID has brought upon the utilities, just because people couldn't pay their bills, and you said, well, we don't pay it this month, don't pay it next month, we'll stop paying it. Well, the reality is there's a huge number out there of bad debt that hasn't been paid. I think it was like $40 billion for the US alone. And so the question is, how does the utility recover that money? Do they raise the rates? Well, I would argue in a world post-COVID, raising anything is not a good idea. So where does that leave the utility? And I would argue that there are opportunities for the utility to move into new businesses, new sort of expanding its role with respect to the relationship with its customers, doing solar maintenance or doing these other sort of non-pipes and wires specific activities that could, balance out the fact that it's lost revenue from, or will be losing revenue from the bad debt expense, as well as energy efficiency and all the other things attacking its revenue model. But allowing it to do these other businesses to help grow its base, those are some ideas as to what the utilities could do. But raising rates doesn't make any sense. Job creation. When you think about the impact the utility could have there, as you looked at putting in new solar plants or putting in charging stations. I mean, utility-owned charging stations throughout communities. I mean, that's a huge opportunity to help the community specific, the local community specific, grow and try to get some people back on their feet. But there's a ton of investment decisions that I think the utility can make as well as the regulators. Both of them can make, to really spur the local economies and help, people that, literally we've got no other choice but help people sort of move this thing forward. I mean, one other area is, commercial, really driving, when you create green communities, you can also sort of help spur investment in your community by having, commercial businesses moving into the community because of the fact you've got such of a strong and solid, renewable and clean energy focused communities. There's a lot of that going on right now. So, the utility has a role, the regulators have a role, an historic role, but I think, post-COVID, we need to rethink that and just at least sort of, challenge ways in which, the utility can be even more effective and really a driver to spur economic growth for local communities versus being silent, which, that's kind of the typical, usual view.
Thank you. Interesting points. Carrie, would love to get your perspective on this. I know that, regulators have done quite a bit over the last year and some change to kind of help shape recovery efforts and post-pandemic, but would love to hear more from your side.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'll speak mostly about what I think that commissioners can do and what their role is. Of course, this will be intertwined with utilities as well. Starting off with COVID relief, Brian's absolutely correct. This was it was a difficult year for a lot of people. And so recognizing that in Illinois, we have a great story, I think. The parties came together, the utilities and the consumer groups, Attorney General's office and commission staff worked for days and weeks to come up with this stipulation that had historic consumer protections. And it does address cost recovery of uncollectibles, which is not an easy, it's not an easy problem to solve, but it was a stipulated agreement that was presented to the commission first when everything shut down a year and a half ago, and then most recently again when the moratorium of shutoffs lifted, and to determine how we were going to come out of that. So that was an important role, I think, that the commission played to help people that were hurting and perhaps finding themselves with unemployment probably for the first time in their lives. I think affordability is an important concept that we need to keep thinking about. The Illinois Commerce Commission opened up a notice of inquiry. We actually opened it up right when the pandemic hit, but of course it proved to be even more timely. Thinking about holistically the definition of low income and affordability to ensure that the people that need the help is getting the help that is available. So the notice of inquiry, it was a over 100-page report capturing all of the filings, and then this can be used as a document that we can do further changes potentially to our regulations, for example. Brian talks a lot about job opportunities. Absolutely, our utilities in Illinois bring a variety of really great job opportunities, and we are always appreciative of that. Of course, the clean energy economy brings even new opportunities. We're under legislation, the Future Energy Jobs legislation, the J in jobs obviously speaks to how the point is to really invigorate this clean energy economy in Illinois. And I think the commission has a role, as I've already talked about, removing barriers for more solar, which leads to jobs of installation of solar, supporting the EV ecosystem with some of our rate design. Illinois is trying to be a leader in the place to drive and own and even manufacture EVs. We are the proud home of Rivian and Lion. And also, a piece of this is tourism. We don't want Illinois to be the barrier for EV drivers as they go across the country. We want people to come to Illinois, charge their vehicles, and stay for a while. And then one thing I do also want to note, another point, is supplier diversity. Illinois, again, I sound like a cheerleader for Illinois, but I would be remiss to say that we have a really great story in the supplier diversity space. Under legislation, utilities were required to file. There was not numbers set or metrics, but just required to file diverse spend at the Illinois Commerce Commission, and we take a deep dive every year. We have a policy session. Well, 6 years ago, the average diverse spend was 15%. Now we're seeing utilities of up to 40% diverse men.
Wow.
Really, really incredible. And I point this out because a lot of these diverse suppliers are small businesses, and oftentimes the first that are impacted by the downturn in the economy. So really supporting these small businesses and ensuring that they have access to a variety of opportunities is a really important point, I think.
Thank you for that. So we actually do have a question for you, Carrie, which came in, and that is, how or will the Biden's executive order accelerating clean energy goals from 2050 to 2035 affect Illinois?
Well, right now we are in robust conversations about the next, like FEJA Part 2, the next piece of legislation. Our main session ended May 31st, and the bill did not pass. I can't speak to what the final bill would say, but in that bill, I mean, I already talked to you about Pritzker's goals. In the legislation, they're putting in decarb dates, decarbonization. There's a robust conversation about when gas goes offline and when coal goes offline. So those are things that will be determined by legislation. So we don't regulate generation as commissioners, we are deregulated. So a lot of that will be answered in legislation, and how it will intersect with Biden's goals. I think the goals are aligned. How that trickles down to Illinois is to be determined, especially when we figure out where the legislation in Illinois ends.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So you mentioned Carrie, you mentioned a couple of really interesting, unique pilots that Illinois was working on, and the market is becoming more competitive as more renewables are getting added on to the grid, but how are some of the ways that utilities and commissions can leverage, unique models in their favor?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that in leveraging, it's important that there are opportunities, of course, to bring innovation and DERs online. I think this is obviously the utilities agree with this. I think this is the direction that everyone's moving in. You're absolutely right. I think one way is by pilot programs. I already talked to you about the microgrid project. There's another example of a pilot program that was approved by the Illinois Commerce Commission. It was a superconductor pilot where ComEd uses a high temperature superconductor technology to connect substations down in the middle of the city. This allows for the first permanent installation on the U.S. electric grid to provide new looped transmission pathways. So that's another interesting way that the utility could come to us and really implement some of this innovation. I think another important way is through rate structures. I think it was Brian who was talking about how the utility knows best of where potentially like solar panels should be put onto the grid. In Illinois, we're handling it kind of in a different way through something called the value of solar. Again, this is a case open before the commission, but I can speak to the legislation that put it in place, which is already determined. The language is determined. So when Illinois gets to 5% penetration in the two regions of its electric utilities, the ComEd and the Ameren zones, they have to each respectively file something called the value of solar docket. Before the 5%, it's full net metering. After, we move to something called the value of solar. And under the legislation, in this docket, the commission is required to take into account location-based and temporal values of DERs, so that when a DER is connected, it's done in a way to potentially enhance the grid. Again, this is obviously, as you can tell, it sounds like a complicated docket because I think it will be. So stay tuned for that. I already mentioned a little bit about our EV rates that were recently approved by the Illinois Commerce Commission as well. And this is to encourage charging at the off-peak hours. One aspect of the rate that was approved allowed commercial EV rate reduced demand charges over the next several years. And this is in order to allow commercial EV charging stations to be financially viable while EV ownership is low. So it's some of these rate structures that I think can be a great opportunity for utilities to innovate and move forward in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Brian, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I'm really encouraged by, you know, all the programs that are getting put in place. And it's interesting because, you know, you sort of frame the question around competition. And it's funny because on the one hand, you're saying, we are saying that the utility is a monopoly and there is no competition, but I think the reality is far from the truth. I mean, I think you look at players that, you know, traditionally, like Tesla and Microsoft and all these players that are starting to kind of get into this energy space, and I would argue they've got a real opportunity to kind of take advantage of particularly the cream of the crop inside of the utility customer base. And so, you know, I'm hopeful that all these programs sort of give the utility the chance to really sort of satisfy the demands that are out there versus having third parties come in and take away all these really cool opportunities that, you know, for whatever structural reason the utility can't. So no, I'm really encouraged by the programs Carrie just walked through.
Yeah, no, they sound amazing. So we did have a question come in, which I probably think is directed to Carrie, which is, what are the biggest obstacles to achieving your goals, your, you know, clean energy goals? Is it technology readiness? Is it access to capital? Or is it having the right regulation in place? Or a mix of all three?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, you know, so the way that we think about it as regulators is cost, right? Who's going to pay for it? How is it going to be paid for? A lot of this, it is done through legislation, but the Commerce Commission in Illinois has a hand on it. So when we have our renewable portfolio standard, the RECs that are procured, the money is collected by the utilities on behalf of the customers, and then the state runs the auction, runs the procurement. The Illinois Commerce Commission approves. So we first approve the plan of how the auction is run, and then we approve to ensure the auction was run properly. So we think of it in that way, how these RECs in Illinois, the RECs are just the value of the zero carbon electricity produced. So, you know, we always have to think about the impact on the customer, and under FEJA, there were caps put in place. So RECs were collected, money to procure RECs was collected, but it could only increase rates by a certain amount. And this is always the push and pull of how we get to our goals without having too much impact on a customer. So for me, that's a huge challenge. I've already talked about reliability. So it's always kind of those two, costs and consumers and reliability of the grid.
Awesome, thank you. Brian, do you have anything to add?
Not on that topic, no.
Okay, great. So, you know, we know that legislation tends to kind of lag behind innovation, but there's some real challenges around how some utilities are organized to be able to pursue unique models. Brian, from your perspective, you know, do you feel that legislation changes are imminent to help those kinds of hindered utilities, for lack of a better word, particularly in light of the fact that many of these policies were written well before the renewables boom?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely a need, and I've been talking about that throughout the course of the day today, really need to relook at some things. And I say that because, you know, you think about the utility customer relationship, and 15 years ago, when I was at my utility, we would call, you know, a customer a load or a premise versus Mr. Johnson or Mrs. Smith. And the utility must become more integral in that relationship with the customer than it ever has before. And so, you know, what systems and technology it uses to do that, you know, is really key. The second is, you know, utilities, I think the guide rails that we've traditionally had for utilities to innovate have been pretty, you know, pretty small, to say the least. And so the question is, you know, how do you extend those guide rails, or how do you allow the utilities to innovate a little bit more so they can really meet the customer? I mean, really, these are customer demands and customer changes. And to my point earlier about the competition, you know, the non-regulated entities are going to come in and just sweep that, you know, out from underneath the utility, unless we're able to really figure out ways to let that utility innovate and maintain those customers. Carrie talked earlier about, you know, leveraging data And, they have to leverage data more insightfully. There's a ton of sensors and smart meters and devices that are out there now than there were 10 years ago. And each one of those things is telling, a story of what's happening at its location, aggregating all that, ensuring it gets into the hands of the right people at the right time to make the right decision. That's an organizational change, I think, as well. Forget the legislative piece, but even an organizational change inside of the company as well. But bottom line, I think the utilities must be more agile. I mean, they've got to have the systems that allow them to make decisions faster. They've got all these EVs coming online. How do they interact with those things? How do they manage that? It's got to be a much more of an agile conversation that they're having with their customers, with their suppliers. So all of those things, I think, are going to force, once again, this sort of relook at how the existing regulations have been structured, what needs to be tweaked. But I really do think that it's to the question asked in the beginning, are we ready? Well, no, I think we're going to learn, over the course of the next few years, kind of, what we didn't know, and that will it's going to probably force some changes for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a balancing act, right? And I'm glad that you mentioned that it's not only the responsibility of the regulators or the commissions to make policy changes. I think that because we're in a highly regulated industry, those policies that are in place to help keep everything honest and regulated well, because utilities do operate effectively as monopolies, that it can also be a crutch for utilities to not necessarily take on the responsibility of agility themselves and really finding where those opportunities are. So it shouldn't all fall to the regulators to make this possible, because there are a lot of structural changes that can happen at the utility side that should be pursued, in addition to, as innovation comes and as the world changes, legislation catching up with where we're at. Carrie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. To the question of whether legislation is imminent, I've already discussed in Illinois that it is potentially imminent. We don't know exactly the outcome, of course, but just to talk a little bit more about the legislation in Illinois, it's encompassing. It talks about a lot of different aspects, including integrated distribution planning and utilities filing transportation electrification plans and performance-based rate making. So a lot of exciting and new things potentially in Illinois. Of course, at the federal level, we're watching the infrastructure bill, opportunities for funding for charging infrastructure and transmission. We don't know the impacts on utilities, but I do think changes are coming. I want to speak to a little bit about what happens without legislation. You both pointed out about the inability sometimes for utilities, and I'd argue commissions to be nimble. Utilities are rightfully conservative in part because they have to consider cost recovery of such products that may not be assured, and commissions are conservative in part because they have concerns about customer benefits that are sometimes uncertain. These are really difficult dynamics that are at play, that are just a reality. But I absolutely agree with you that I think we all need to be more nimble with all the new technology and changes coming. I will say, though, I still think that without legislation, even though legislation really is the quicker route, there are opportunities, of course, to make changes and to bring on this new technology. I've talked a lot today about new rates and our interconnection rules and some of the pilot programs. But I wanted to point to an example how sometimes a pilot can lead to legislation. In Illinois conducted a AMI infrastructure pilot in around 2010. And because of this pilot, the legislation passed soon after in 2011 to deploy AMI statewide. And so now we are at 100% AMI deployment in our two main investor-owned utilities. So sometimes a pilot can lead to legislation even when it's not started at the legislative level.
That's really great. You know, I have a background in innovation myself in civic innovation projects. And so I kind of understand the tightrope that gets walked, especially when you're dealing with, you know, taxpayer dollars and you're working in critical infrastructure markets. And, you know, innovation and progress is great, but just you need to have really great business cases and really great, you know, frameworks for deploying those innovations within that space in order to really justify it. And so it's good to have the regulations in place so it keeps everybody honest and above board and things on track, especially when you have to keep the lights on 24/7. Puns intended, of course, because this wouldn't be a utility conversation without energy puns. But you're absolutely correct. Both of you have brought some really great points forward today. And I appreciate the balance of perspectives. We have no more time left, which is such a shame because I would love to continue talking with you. So thank you again for your time. Laurel, I think I'm passing the torch to you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joyce, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Laurel with Zpryme, and that was a really insightful panel on regulating for tomorrow. I recently asked Zalewski, the former commissioner of the ICC, Illinois Commerce Commission, if regulators struggle with keeping up with the fast-paced technology innovations in the energy space, and her response was that regulators sure can keep up with the technology, but regulation cannot. So one technology that regulation and utilities are beginning to catch up on is vehicle to grid, V2G, such as with the FERC 2222 order and California Rule 21. Vehicle to grid is an exciting and promising storage technology. So without further ado, I'm excited to dive into this topic of transportation electrification and V2G storage with Stina Brock. Stina, could you share a bit about yourself and the work you're doing at your company, Proterra?
Yes, thank you, Laurel. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here with this group. So my name is Stina Brock. As Laurel said, I currently head up the software business at Proterra, focused on that vehicle to grid integration and helping our customers manage their electric fleets. And my background is in the energy space and started off at doing demand response back in the mid-2000s and found that a really interesting opportunity because I wanted to get more into how we can make the grid sustainable and was looking at batteries and other technologies, and demand response was pretty interesting because you don't really need any of those special technologies. You can just modify how you're using your electricity. So that was really a good experience for me. And then I did move over into the storage space, both grid scale storage and residential solar plus storage. And all the time kind of focused on how we could use software to orchestrate how those DERs, those distributed energy resources, can provide value to customers and then also the grid. And so now I'm looking at how we can do that with electric vehicles and electric fleets. And I can do a bit of an overview on Proterra too, Laurel, with some slides maybe, if that's useful.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So let me see if I can share my screen here. All right. Okay. So now I'm at Proterra, joined a couple of months ago and really excited to help with the great business that they've built. The company was founded back in 2004, and currently they have 3 business units. So we have the transit business, which is where Proterra got started, building these purpose-built electric transit vehicles. And what they realized was they're really good at building batteries and electric drivetrains. And so after doing that for many years, they took that battery and drivetrain and have recently started working with other OEMs to put the battery and drivetrain in other vehicles to help them electrify. And so that includes other types of like trucks, for example, other types of commercial vehicles, and also the school bus is a great example of how we have done that in our Proterra powered business. And then the third business unit at Proterra is in the energy, on the energy side. And so there we focus on chargers and helping our customers with the infrastructure needed to support their electric fleets. And that's also where the software lives. And so my focus on the software side is how we can, like I said, help our customers manage their fleets of vehicles and look at how they can do smart charging and grid integration from that perspective. So for sure on the vehicle to grid side, there's a lot of interesting activity. So this chart here is from Morgan Stanley and shows how we expect fleets to electrify or electric vehicles to electrify over the next 20 to 30 years. And it's going to happen fast. And I think it's going to happen faster than we expect. And it's going to have really big implications for the grid. So if you look at, for example, like 50 Class 8 trucks, those vehicles charging will have the same peak demand as like a skyscraper. So the grid is going to need to be able to catch up pretty fast to where this fleet electrification is happening and be able to support these huge loads in maybe locations that it hasn't had to before. So I think we're going to need some flexibility. We're definitely going to need software to help manage how these vehicles charge, both for the customers, but then also from the grid perspective. And that's where these concepts of like V2G come in, right? So the sort of the first version of vehicle to grid is sometimes people call it V1G. And that's where maybe you modify how the vehicle charges or the fleet charges in order to provide benefits to the grid. So for example, you could do demand response by just reducing your charging or not charging during certain times of the day. And I know a lot of utilities are looking at different rate structures that they can create to kind of help encourage customers to charge at more strategically beneficial times. So those are other examples. But so from the software perspective, when I'm thinking about vehicle to grid integration, I'm thinking about first visibility. We want to be able to have data and be able to share that with all the key parties about when vehicles are charging and what that looks like. And then there's the smart charging and the V1G services, which is around being strategic and smart about when you're going to charge that vehicle and at what rates. And then V2G, which is when we want to push energy back to the grid. So actually taking energy from the battery of the vehicle and then sending that out to the grid. And this is kind of what that looks like, excuse me, on the V2G side. So there's a couple of core components, right? So you need to make sure that you have a V2G compatible vehicle. And there's some software involved in that. And there's also hardware that needs to be in place to be able to make sure you can send those electrons out of the vehicle. And then on the charger side, the same thing. You want to make sure your charger is able to communicate to the vehicle and be able to discharge energy from that vehicle. And there are some standards in the, in the heavy duty, medium duty space. OCPP is very popular. But, we are kind of right on the edge of when this stuff is happening. So for example, the OCPP standard related to V2G is not finalized yet. So there's a lot that's open to interpretation that vendors kind of have to work with there. And then there's the connection to the utility, so or the grid operator. So if you want to be able to participate in demand response programs or other grid services, you need to be able to receive those instructions from your utility or grid operator, and then also send data back so that you can, participate in that program and that everyone can understand the different performance metrics that are required so that people can understand how that's working for the grid. So those are some of the key components, and we can definitely dig into that more if people have questions. And then I think that might be it for the overview. Oh, I guess one last thing is around Proterra's V2G projects. So we do have a couple of V2G projects out there. I'll go from right to left here. Actually, the one in Massachusetts is up and running this summer. We have buses doing demand response in New England, which is great. And then Michigan is a project that will hopefully kick off sometime soon. It's in planning right now. And so there's a lot of discussions about what that might look like. And then there's an opportunity in Virginia as well, where we have a project that has gone live and looking at how we can work with Dominion Energy on that to provide services back to the grid. So I think that's it for the overview to get us started.
Thank you, Stina. So the escalating vehicle electrification is creating this whole new beautiful complex system where stakeholders must change the way they interact, from utilities and car owners and everybody in between. What are some of your favorite projects you have right now, and could you talk more about those and how they got started?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have quite a few projects on the transit side with electric fleets, where people are starting to increase the number of electric vehicles that they have in their mixed fleets there. And then also on the school bus side. So from a V2G perspective, I think school buses are probably one of the more exciting electric vehicles for that type of application. Since joining Proterra, I've learned a lot more about transit vehicles, for example. And what I've learned is that transit vehicles operate on a very full schedule. So you want to have extremely high utilization rates on your transit vehicles. And so they leave first thing in the morning, and then you want to try to keep them running their routes for the majority of the day. So those buses are not really sitting around very much. And so from a grid perspective, they are slightly less interesting because, you can't do something like V2G with them because they're too busy. So that's why the school buses are really interesting, because school buses take their passengers in the morning and then also in the afternoon or evening. And then there's a lot of time during the middle of the day where you can do interesting things around how you might be charging and being able to dispatch power to the grid. So that's why the vehicle to grid for school buses is getting a lot of attention. And our Massachusetts program is one of the more interesting ones, because we have some cool partners in that program who are looking at how they can kind of pilot demand response with school buses, and then how they could sort of roll that out and work with other utilities and in other parts of the country for that. Summertime's obviously also a great time for school bus because they're available to participate in these programs. So I think from a utility perspective, it's interesting to think about how vehicles can, they will cause challenges on the grid, but they can also become an interesting resource for flexibility. And then there's a couple of other cool projects we've got going on. I think the one that I mentioned in Montgomery County there in Virginia is going to be one of the biggest deployments of electric school buses, sorry. And so that will be fascinating. There's a lot to learn, I think, on the customer side for how you operate an electric fleet of school buses differently than you would if it was diesel. So just from a fueling perspective, having to think about electricity and how you're using that electricity is different. And then getting the drivers used to electric vehicles too is another piece of it. So I think the more projects we see out there, then the more people will get used to them, and it's just going to ramp up faster and faster.
Right. And the key quote that stuck out to me was how electric vehicles pose a lot of challenges to the grid as we keep adopting more, but we can also use them as a resource if we handle them smartly.
Yep, exactly.
I am curious about what stakeholders seem most interested in initiating these projects. Is it utilities or city metros or schools?
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about electric vehicles as opposed to the traditional vehicles. We're seeing a lot more partnership models emerge. For example, in Massachusetts, the city of Beverly was very involved in helping that school electrify. And there are a lot of benefits to the community, of course, to have electric school buses, for example. So I think you see the emergence of some new stakeholders on that front. So, you know, previously a city might not have been that interested in the procurement of school buses if it wasn't, you know, part of their budget or that sort of thing. But now there are efforts from a sustainability perspective that a lot of cities are pursuing. And so electric school buses can fit into that. And so I think we're seeing more partnerships on like that front. Utilities also, I think, are more involved than they've had to be in the past as well, and can really be partners to customers, because the infrastructure side from a grid perspective to, you know, provide enough energy to support these fleets really requires expertise. So utilities can really be a partner to these customers, both on the school side, but also with municipal transit fleets as well, for, you know, how they can get that set up. And the other piece on the utility side is that it's, you know, if you look at like Rocky Mountain Institute and others who have provided guidance to help people electrify their fleets, there's a lot of focus on trying to future-proof, right? So even if you're only going to get one electric bus now to start with, you do want to think about where you want to be in 10 years. And if you're going to go through an upgrade on the infrastructure side from a grid perspective, you want to be thinking out into the future. So that's where that's where the utilities, I think, can really be helpful to customers on that front too.
Right. My next question is almost like you predicted it, is how do you think utilities can further support customers with fleet electrification?
Yeah, that's a good one. So that matches up to what I was just touching on. And I know that like Autin Energy, for example, down where you guys are, I think they've thought a lot about this. I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago with a representative from there, and you know, they talked about that. So, you know, previously utilities hadn't had to be involved in, again, these like fleet discussions for fueling and things like that for traditional vehicles. So now I think it may be a different type of employee within the utility, or maybe even a different group that's formed to kind of really guide these discussions. Because I think the other piece of it too is that it may be smart to have fleets charge in certain locations. So even if you have a school, there's questions around, you know, should the school buses charge at that normal depot where they currently have school buses, or would it be smarter to kind of have charging locations in different places? And can the utility and maybe other municipal entities kind of work together to think about what makes sense for the whole community? As opposed to just having projects kind of pop up on a one-off basis.
Right, and creating that group within the utility that is really accountable for supporting the electrification is really important. The director of electrification at SCE really emphasized that before they had their electrification program or department, there was really no one that was accountable for the goals that they were setting. So no one was really responsible for making their goals happen.
Yeah, so it's a whole new org situation that's popping up, I think.
And you also mentioned that there's new partnership models forming. What new types of business models are emerging with fleet electrification?
Yeah, that's been really cool to see. So I think there's a lot of innovation happening on that side. So for our project in Massachusetts, we are working with a company called Highland Electric Transportation, and they have created a company that's focused on doing school bus as a service. So electric school bus as a service. So the customer doesn't have to pay for the vehicle. It doesn't have to worry about maintaining the vehicle. They can just pay a set fee to Highland Electric, and Highland Electric will take care of those electric school buses for them. So I think that, you know, really helps people. I think there's a lot of, you know, hesitation around what you might be taking on when you're starting an electric fleet project. So to have a partner like that is really helpful to bring in that expertise. And also because I think it really helps with the cost certainty. So if you know how much you're going to pay per mile to use that school bus, then I think you can have a really good understanding of what that looks like from a budget perspective, which is helpful to schools particularly and communities. And then the other interesting model that we've seen is with our customers in Virginia. And so Dominion Energy is actually working with customers there to help offset the cost of the electric part of the school bus. So they have a program where the schools pay for the cost of what a non-electric school bus would cost them. And then Dominion pays for the difference and the rest of it, and basically owns that battery that's in the vehicle. So then Dominion Energy has the right to use those batteries in those school buses for grid support, for demand response. And so they have a big project underway with us where we're trying to learn as much as we can from these early deployments, and then do some analysis on what types of services you can get from those school buses, what does V2G do for the grid, and what are the different types of considerations that you need to think about if you're putting these programs in place.
Right. Electric school buses as a service seems really exciting for me. I was thinking about how it could be valuable for rural communities where you can have the school buses there during school, but during the breaks and summer, you could drive the bus with the battery to a place where the load and demand is.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of opportunities.
Right. And then going back to V2G, to what extent have you embraced that technology with your projects? And how do you see V2G impacting the adoption of fleet electrification, as well as just impacting the grid resilience?
Yeah, we're really excited about vehicle to grid applications and the potential that has to help commercial vehicles and the grid. So from the grid side, I mean, I've spent a lot of my career in energy and thinking about the utility grid and how we can integrate resources. And so for me, vehicle to grid really helps these electric fleets become active participants in that grid flexibility. And, I think that street goes both ways. I think, the more you're thinking about how you can provide services to the grid, the more you're also thinking about, how you want to operate that resource to provide value for you as well. So Proterra has been really active in moving forward with vehicle to grid for our vehicles, as well as our chargers and our software. So like I mentioned, it's pretty early on, I think, in this becoming like a standard process. So there's been customization required and sort of, bespoke work to make sure that our vehicles will be able to provide our customers with these services. And I think there's a resiliency component too. There's vehicle to grid for grid services, but then there's also kind of maybe vehicle to building that we're hearing a lot of customers ask about. And so I think there's, once it becomes kind of a standard process, there'll be a lot of interesting opportunities for different parties, different groups, different types of fleets for vehicle to grid.
Mm-hmm. And we have a lot of audience questions coming in now, so I think we can
great
into the Q&A. We could start with what are the biggest challenges, whether regulatory, technical, policy, or customer demand? What are the biggest challenges to driving broader V2G adoption in the school bus or transit segment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, I think this is where the partnerships come in, like you mentioned, Laurel, on the utility side, because I think one of the bigger hurdles is making sure you have a V2G approved charger. For example, in California, the utilities all maintain approved lists for the different chargers, and then the infrastructure that you need on the grid side is different than if you're not planning to export to the grid, right? So managing those interconnection queues, I think helps everybody in this space. The faster that different resources can get through those. So I think that's an opportunity to make that less of a hurdle on the once you have the infrastructure planning side, being able to kind of get those applications in and approved. And again, from a future proofing perspective, I think you want to think out into the future a little bit, and sometimes that can also be kind of challenging when you're trying to submit applications for interconnection and things like that. So I think those are some of the pieces. I think making sure that utilities are kind of keeping pace with customers for understanding the chargers that are being used, and then getting through those interconnection queues are important.
Exactly. And another key policy deterrent that I've heard of is that V2G is that net metering state laws don't really include V2G. So net metering laws reward solar and other distributed energy resources, but they should also reward V2G. And
yeah, that's a good point. It's just can be thought of as a battery, you know, in a lot of ways. So totally agree.
Let me see if one person is asking if they can contact you for follow-up after the presentation.
Oh yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah, I'd love to talk to anyone who wants to dig in more on this. We do also have a pretty extensive planning team that really looks at how we can help our customers, because the planning piece is really challenging. Like if you're thinking of, you know, electrifying your fleet, there's a lot of calculations to be done and analysis on how many chargers do you need and what size batteries should you get for those vehicles. I think on the school bus side, it's a little bit easier because you've got quite a good battery for the amount of driving that you need to do. But on the transit side, you have these routes that you're running, and you need to make sure you're able to meet those with an electric vehicle instead of your traditional vehicle. So I'd love to talk to anyone after this who wants to follow up more, and I'd be happy to do that.
Great. Is LinkedIn a good means to contact you, or Twitter, or?
Yep. All of those work great. And also my email address at Proterra is sbrock@proterra.com. So if you can't find me on LinkedIn, then happy to have an email or anything like that.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you today, Stina. And it looks like we've reached the end of today's Solar Storage Fest programming. If you're still curious about this topic, you can also check out Proterra's website. And they're also listed on NASDAQ with the stock symbol PTRA. I'm not sure I was allowed to say that, but I'm also, disclaimer, I'm not a certified financial advisor. And
no, we're excited. Thank you.
Remember to follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And I'll pass it back to Erin Autin for the final remarks.
Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, Stina. That was a great conversation. Good to hear from you as always. And thank you, everyone. We have reached, as Laurel said, the end of Solar Storage Fest 2021. We're really happy to have had you here the past 2 days. We've had a lot of great conversations. Like Laurel was talking about, definitely feel free to reach out to us and we can help connect you with any speakers that you might want to get in touch with, or anyone at Zpryme. Stick around for about 30 minutes of networking, and we will see you all soon. Thank you.